Chapter 2584. Chapter 2584. Chapter 2584. Master of the Ice Tower. The middle-aged woman, in the sky, had a peerlessly beautiful appearance. However, her eyes were filled with a cold glint, causing her entire being to look extremely cold. It was as though one would be frozen into ice if one were to approach her. After she appeared, the space within tens of thousands of meters was covered in a layer of frost. It was as if sharp blades were flowing in the space, sending chills down one's spine. Everyone's gaze was focused on the middle-aged woman, and their eyes were trembling non-stop. This woman is so strong, she seems to be even more terrifying than the ancestors of thousands of babies. Since when was there such a terrifying woman in the frozen ruins? She's an ice attribute martial artist. If I'm not wrong, she's most likely the Ice Tower Master. As the crowd discussed, they looked at the middle-aged woman with unconcealable fear in their eyes. Ice Tower Master? When Ye Tian heard the discussion below, his eyes narrowed as he looked at Huang Fu Hong. Huang Fu Hong was a member of the Ice Tower. If this woman really was the Ice Tower Master, then Huang Fu Hong would definitely recognize her. Ye Tian carefully observed the woman's eyebrows and eyes, which were somewhat similar to Huang Fu Hong's. Auntie. At this time, Huang Fu Hong's eyes trembled. He couldn't hide the joy in his eyes as he exclaimed in surprise. The middle-aged woman before him was none other than Huang Fu Hong's aunt, the current master of the Ice Pavilion, Huang Fu Changsheng. When Ye Tian heard Huang Fu Hong's cold voice, his gaze slightly changed, and he felt a little strange. He originally thought that Huang Fu Zhangsheng was Huang Fu Hong's mother, but he didn't expect her to be his aunt. In the surrounding void, when the other experts saw Huang Fu Zhangsheng, they restrained their auras one after another. They were actually a little fearful. This crazy woman, Huang Fu Zhangsheng, has appeared. This is going to be troublesome. Heavenly Demon Sect leader Mo Xiaogu frowned and looked at Huang Fu Zhangsheng with an embarrassed expression. He knew that Huang Fu Zhangsheng was extremely strong, and he could be said to be the strongest among the 7 sects. Huang Fu Zhangsheng's appearance was out of Mo Xiaogu's expectation. He had originally planned to take advantage of the chaos to snatch the Bloodwing token from Ye Tian. But Huang Fu Changsheng had come, and he would surely protect Huang Fu Hong. Moreover, it was extremely likely that he would protect Ye Tian and Feng Qi as well. In this way, it would be very difficult for him to make a move against Ye Tian. Father, is this woman very powerful? Mo Chunyan frowned as he looked at Mo Xiaogu, feeling that the latter was a little afraid. Yes. The Bone Demon Owl nodded, even as he thought to himself, Huang Fu Zhangsheng was already a demi-saint champion dozens of millennia ago. Her ability right now might not be able to insta-kill the patriarch of thousands of babies, but she would definitely thrash that old monster. Little girl from the Huang Fu clan, so it's you. At this moment, the voice of the thousands of babies' old ancestor rang out. Even though he was trying his best to remain calm, there was a slight tremble in his voice. Clearly, he was a little fearful. We meet again, patriarch of thousands of babies. Huang Fu Zhangsheng spoke coldly, each word exuding an immeasurably chilling killing intent. Do you really want to kill my patriarch? The patriarch of thousands of babies laughed in provocation. Patriarch of thousands of babies, the vengeance of my brother's murder is absolutely irreconcilable. Today we shall settle our grudges, old and new. Either you die or I die. Huang Fu Zhangsheng's voice resounded in the void, the hint of coldness intensifying the presence of frost and snow in the air. Her entire body was surging with blades of ice, as if she was an ice queen who stood over the endless plains of ice. What? Huang Fu Zhangsheng's words left Huang Fu Hong dumbfounded, and he cried out in disbelief. Huang Fu Zhangsheng's beautiful eyes flickered and locked onto the giant coffin. Hong she said loudly, your father's murderer is right in front of you. He is the patriarch of thousands of babies. Huang Fu Hong was stunned abruptly, and his gaze trembled violently. He knew a long time ago that his father had died at the hands of the Ghost Corps 13 Coffins, so he especially hated the members of the Ghost Corps 13 Coffins. But he never imagined that the person who killed his father was the person before him, the patriarch of thousands of babies. At this moment, Huang Fu Zhangxing's cold eyes stared at the coffins of thousands of babies, and the scene from many years ago was still vivid before his eyes. All those years ago, she and Huang Fu Zhangfeng had entered a primeval ruin, yet they'd unexpectedly encountered the patriarch of thousands of babies. For the sake of saving her, Huang Fu Zhangfeng had used his life to hold back the patriarch of thousands of babies, and he'd won a chance for her to survive. After so many years, she hadn't forgotten for a moment in her heart. She would surely kill the patriarch of thousands of babies to avenge her brother. Huang Fu Zhangxing, you have to think it through. This is Plentiful City. Do you really want to make a move against my patriarch? Meanwhile, the patriarch of thousands of babies spoke once more. Even though it was a threat, it obviously revealed his cowardice. So what if it's Plentiful City? Huang Fu Zhangxing smiled coldly, and she said in a cold voice, even if all 13 sky coffins of ghoul corpses are here, I, Huang Fu Zhangxing, will surely kill you today. As soon as she finished speaking, the cold aura around her increased once more, and the frost in the sky became even sharper. The entire heaven and earth had actually turned into a world of frost in an instant. This woman is so scheming. Nie Tian looked at Huang Fu Zhangxing, and as he felt the coldness in the sky, the corners of his mouth curled into a smile as he thought to himself. On the surface, Huang Fu Zhangxing seemed to be slightly rash, and she'd lost her mind because of anger. But in reality, she was extremely calm, and she'd already secretly prepared everything. Huang Fu Zhangxing had secretly pulled out a large net, and when she pulled the net, it would be the moment that the patriarch of thousands of babies lost his life. Huang Fu Zhangxing seemed to be releasing the aura of her entire body, but in reality, she was setting up an enormous barrier. Nie Tian was very sensitive to barriers. The coldness in the sky was like a dormant ferocious beast that could erupt with terrifying power at any time and annihilate everything. Nie Tian, let's retreat. At this time, Huang Fu Hong secretly transmitted his voice to Nie Tian, and his figure slightly retreated. Nie Tian maintained his composure and also retreated. Feng Qi was also retreating, and it was obvious that he'd also received Huang Fu Hong's transmission. Huang Fu Zhangxing, you're talking big. The patriarch of thousands of babies laughed wildly and said, I admit that your current strength is indeed incomparable to before, but you want to act wildly in Plentiful City with the strength of one person? Have you really thought it through? The eyes of the crowd below were also trembling. Huang Fu Zhangxing's words were indeed too arrogant. No matter how strong she was, it was impossible for her to fight against the 13 sky coffins of ghoul corpses at the same time, right? What do you think? Huang Fu Zhangxing smiled coldly, and a pair of sky coffins of ghoul corpses surged in her cold eyes. The patriarch of thousands of babies was surprised, and in the next moment, he felt that something was wrong and directly exclaimed, Not good. It's too late to know that it's not good now. Huang Fu Zhangxing let out a cold grin as he placed his palms together and performed a strange seal, causing a terrifying icy aura to be unleashed. Chapter 2585. Boom! As soon as Huang Fu Zhangxing activated the barrier, a terrifying icy aura was unleashed. The terrifying icy aura was like a rampaging beast roaring in the sky. Crack, crack, crack. The air within a radius of 100,000 meters was frozen. Frost and snow danced in the air like sharp blades. The whole world seemed to have turned into an ice cellar in an instant. Sharp icicles floated in the air, sending chills down people's spines. In such a barrier, ordinary warriors at the peak of Paramount God Realm would be frozen into pieces. Even experts at the peak of Paramount God Realm could only withstand the cold, and couldn't use any strength. The sky instantly turned into a world of ice and snow. The people on the ground stepped back when they felt the cold air blowing on their faces. The streets and the ground below were frozen. QL 11-inch. This woman is so scary. The eyes of the crowd trembled as they looked at Huangfu Zhangxing in horror. Who would have thought that a female martial artist could be so terrifying? At this moment, the experts hiding in the air all stepped back. Their eyes were also trembling. They were shocked by Huangfu Zhangxing's strength. Father, this woman is so powerful. Mo Chunyan's face was full of shock, and the muscles on his face were trembling. Mo Xiaogu's face was gloomy, and he didn't say anything. To be honest, although he knew that his strength was not as strong as Huangfu Zhangxing, he was competitive. He thought that even if he wasn't a match for Huangfu Zhangxing, he wouldn't be that much weaker than Huangfu Zhangxing. But at this moment, he realized that compared to Huangfu Zhangxing, he was not just 1 or 2 levels weaker, but thousands of levels weaker. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Huangfu Zhangxing's strength was enough to kill Mo Xiaogu. The ice tower was indeed the force that once ruled the frozen ruins. On the other side, Nie Tian and the others retreated from the barrier. At this moment, Nie Tian's expression was one of shock, but his eyes were also filled with confusion. When Huangfu Zhangxing saved Jun Aoqing, he could tell that Huangfu Zhangxing's strength was above the patriarch of the thousands of babies. In a normal battle, Huangfu Zhangxing should have easily defeated the old ancestor of thousands of babies. But Huangfu Zhangxing created such a big barrier. Wasn't it a little overkill? If Huangfu Zhangxing wanted to kill thousands of babies, there was no need for him to activate such a powerful barrier. Nie Tian, this is my aunt's ice death barrier. Inside the barrier, his aunt's ability could reach the pinnacle of demi-saint, and the ice death barrier could suppress the ability of others as well. Aunt, open the ice-killing barrier, and the thousands of babies will definitely die. Huangfu Hong saw Nie Tian's puzzled expression and thought that Nie Tian was amazed by the power of the barrier, so he proudly said with a smile. Nie Tian's eyebrows furrowed and he still looked confused. 3 old things, are you still not going to come out? Cold smile appeared on Huangfu Zhangxing's face as he looked at the frost within the spirit formation. Master of the Ice Tower, your ability is truly astonishing. To think that you've discovered me. In the very next moment, a deep voice resounded from within the frost. The void then trembled a little, and 3 black coffins appeared. Each of them was no smaller than the coffins of the thousands of babies, and they were emanating an incomparably violent killing aura. Huh! The sudden scene made Nie Tian's eyes narrow as he understood at once. It turned out that Huangfu Zhangxing had activated the ice death barrier for the sake of the 3 people hiding in the void. There was no doubt that the 3 coffins were of the same class as the sky coffins, and the people within them were the masters of the sky coffins, just like the old ancestor of the thousands of babies. What was even more bizarre was that the 3 coffins were actually connected to one another, which made the killing aura of the coffins even thicker. What's going on? Huangfu Hong's expression changed when he saw this. His eyes were filled with fear. He never imagined that there would be other champions hiding in the void. No wonder Huangfu Zhangxing would activate the ice death barrier. Look, another 3 coffins have appeared. It's the masters of the sky coffins again. The crowd below stared at the 3 coffins in the sky, their eyes trembling as they shouted. Who would have thought that there would be 4 masters of the sky coffins here at the same time? The surrounding experts in the void retreated once again, their faces filled with unconcealable fear. It was rare to see 4 masters of the 13 sky coffins appearing at the same time. Could the master of the ice tower, Huangfu Zhangxing, fight against 4 masters of the sky coffins at the same time? So it's the 3 old monsters of the ice, thunder, and fire palace. Huangfu Zhangxing showed no signs of fear despite the appearance of the 3 coffins. The corner of his lips twitched slightly as he pointed at the 3 coffins and said, "You're the flowing death ice coffin, you're the purple flame fire coffin, and you're the defying cloud thunder coffin. The three coffins shook slightly, followed by a deep voice. Master of the Ice Tower, you seem to be quite familiar with the 13 sky coffins. The one who spoke was the flowing death ice coffin master, who said coldly, unfortunately, you're destined to die here today. 4 sky coffins attacking at the same time. Even a pseudo-sacred expert would not be able to withstand it. The voice of the purple flame fire coffin master was extremely violent. To be able to die at the hands of one of the 4 great heavenly coffins, you, the master of the Ice Tower, did not die in vain. The defying cloud lightning coffin's voice was like thunder, majestic and forceful. The crowd's eyes flickered when they heard the words of the 3 sky coffins, as if they were worried for Huangfu Zhangxing. It was undeniable that Huangfu Zhangxing's strength was extremely powerful. However, she was only one person after all. Facing 4 experts at the same time, she would be at a great disadvantage. I didn't expect the progenitors of the ice, thunder, and fire sects to be here too. With their appearance, Huangfu Zhangxing will surely die. The leader of the heavenly demon sect, Mo Xiaogu, was hiding in the void, watching the scene in the ice death barrier with excitement. He felt threatened by Huangfu Zhangxing's strength. If Huangfu Zhangxing were to die in the hands of the 4 sky coffins, it would be great news for Mo Xiaogu. 4 old monsters, you're overestimating yourselves. Huangfu Zhangxing showed no sign of fear facing the 4 sky coffin masters. Instead, the coldness in her eyes grew stronger. She had long sensed the presence of the ice, thunder, and fire progenitors, but she did not leave the place. Instead, she secretly activated the ice death barrier. Since she dared to do so, it meant that she had the strength to kill the 4 sky coffins. In the eyes of Huangfu Zhangxing, all 4 of you old freaks are only trash. Huangfu Zhangxing snapped with an imperious aura. Even most men would not have such an aura. Huangfu Zhangxing, you're too full of yourself. Progenitor Purple Flame had a fiery temper. He instantly became enraged after hearing Huangfu Zhangxing's words. The giant coffin shuddered violently as a terrifying black flame appeared, which transformed into a black hand grabbing at Huangfu Zhangxing. Chapter 2586. Chapter 2586. Chapter 2586. Killing God amidst ice. The purple flame ancestor suddenly made his move. A hand of dark flames shot out at extreme speed towards Huangfu Zhangxing. There was no fear in Huangfu Zhangxing's beautiful eyes in the face of the sudden attack, only murderous intent and battle intent. Frozen Heart Formula, Blade of Dark Destruction. Huangfu Zhangxing spoke coldly, raising her palm and slapping it out. A wave of dark ice energy shot out at extreme speed and sharpness. In an instant, the void trembled slightly as if it was about to be torn apart. Old Hua, watch out! That was when the Patriarch of Flowing Kill seemed to have sensed something and cried out in fear. Poof! Boom! But in the next instant, the blade of dark destruction flew past and pierced through the hand of darkness, shattering it in the air. The extremely sharp blade of dark destruction descended abruptly and landed on the purple flame coffin. Boom! Boom! Arg! 2 dull sounds rang out at almost the same time. The purple flame coffin was pierced through by the blade of dark destruction, and a miserable howl like a pig being slaughtered was heard from within. In the void, the blade of dark destruction vanished, and the space became unusually quiet, the atmosphere so oppressive that it was suffocating. Everyone stared at the ice-killing barrier blankly, unsure of what had happened. A miserable howl came from within the purple flame coffin, and there was no more movement after that. The Patriarch of Thousands of Babies, the Patriarch of Flowing Kill, and the Patriarch of Against Cloud stared at the purple flame coffin with trembling eyes, seemingly realizing that something terrible had happened. At that moment, fresh blood suddenly flowed out of the purple flame coffin, and the stench of blood permeated the air. Old Hua, Patriarch of Flowing Kill, and the Patriarch of Against Cloud cried out in shock and grief. Bang! Just as they cried out, the purple flame coffin shook violently and exploded, filling the air with bloody light and a thick stench of blood. Hiss! This scene caused everyone to suck in a breath of cold air, and their expressions were filled with extreme shock. It was only then that they realized what had happened. Huangfu Zhongxing had killed the purple flame ancestor with a single strike. In everyone's opinion, this was something that was completely impossible. The purple flame patriarch was one of the 13 skies of the ghoul corpses, a genuine demi-saint. How could the crowd accept that a demi-saint had died just like that? Huangfu Zhongxing's strength was too strong, instantly killing an opponent of the same strength. This, Emo Xiaogu, the leader of Sky Demon sect, was shocked by the scene in front of him. His mouth was wide open but he could not say a word. At this moment, he finally understood that Huangfu Zhongxing wasn't an expert on the same level as him since a long time ago, and Huangfu Zhongxing was an existence that completely surpassed him. It wasn't the slightest exaggeration to say that the strength Huangfu Zhongxing revealed at this moment was absolutely in the top 10 even in the entire Icebound Ruins. Nie Tian watched from afar and was equally shocked. His little face was lifeless. Although Huangfu Zhongxing was a woman, her strength was indeed astonishing. Nie Tian felt that Huangfu Zhongxing's combat strength wasn't the slightest bit inferior to those experts in the abandoned land. And she is actually so powerful. Not to mention others, even Huangfu Hong was shocked. Before this, he only knew that Huangfu Zhongxing was very powerful and might be the strongest among the 7 major sections. However, he would never have imagined that Huangfu Zhongxing could be so powerful. Such strength could only be described as abnormal. 4 great sky coffins? Is this all you've got? Huangfu Zhongxing smiled coldly in the icy death boundary. Her posture was incomparably arrogant, and the killing intent in her eyes was even more intense. Back then, her brother had died in the hands of the thousands of babies patriarch. She did not just hate the thousands of babies patriarch, but everyone in the 13 ghoul corpses' coffins. She would kill every single person in the 13 ghoul corpses' coffins she saw. However, she was still very careful at this moment. There were actually many factors that allowed her to instantly kill Purple Flame Ancestor with that move just now. Purple Flame Ancestor had been too impulsive and had greatly underestimated Huangfu Zhongxing's strength. Moreover, Purple Flame Ancestor was a martial artist of the fire attribute, and his strength was suppressed even more in the icy death boundary. Most importantly, Huangfu Zhongxing's strength had been greatly improved in the icy death boundary. Huangfu Zhongxing, you will pay for my second brother's life. Hearing Huangfu Zhongxing's arrogant words, Ancestor Flowing Kill, who was in the Flowing Kill ice coffin, was instantly enraged. With a low roar, a layer of strange ice crystals formed on the surface of the coffin, which rapidly turned into thousands of icicles, whizzing toward Huangfu Zhongxing. Inside the 13 ghoul corpses' coffins, the ice, thunder, and fire ancestors were 3 brothers, and they were very close. Ancestor Flowing Kill was infuriated when Purple Flame Ancestor was killed. The aura that Ancestor Flowing Kill displayed at this moment far surpassed that of Purple Flame Ancestor. He was a martial artist of the ice attribute, so he was almost unaffected in the icy death boundary. Bitch, I'll kill you! At the same time, Ancestor Aiyun, who was in the cloud-defying thunder coffin, also made his move. Terrifying thunder energy surged from the huge coffin, and dazzling thunder and lightning spread throughout the space, connecting together like a sea of thunder and lightning. Boom! The thunder energy surged violently in the air, and then condensed together, turning into a pillar of thunder, which blasted toward Huangfu Zhongxing. Ah! In the third direction, the ancestor of the thousands of babies also made his move. Within the icy death boundary, incomparably mournful cries of babies sounded, and extremely gloomy yin energy condensed, rolling like a tide, and pressed toward Huangfu Zhongxing. The three ancestors attacked at the same time, and the entire icy death boundary was under the impact. It shook violently, as if it was about to collapse. Ant. Seeing this, Huang Fu Hong's eyes trembled, and he was obviously very worried. Huang Fu Zhongxing stood in the air like an iceberg, not moving an inch. At this moment, she actually closed her eyes, as if she was sensing something. Icy Heart Technique, 9 Dragons Icy Death. The next moment, Huang Fu Zhongxing suddenly opened his eyes, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly as he murmured, "Boom! Boom! Boom!" Just as she finished speaking, the dark ice energy in the icy death boundary suddenly became violent, as if the ferocious beast that was hibernating in the space had suddenly become crazy. The next moment, a shocking scene happened. Endless dark ice energy condensed in the air, and in an instant, 9 dark ice dragons were formed. Roar! The dragons' roars shook the sky, and a monstrous dragon might was unleashed. Endless frost aura circulated on the bodies of the 9 dark ice dragons, and the sharp aura seemed to be able to destroy everything. Boom! 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 Within the ice deathly boundary, frost danced wildly and covered everything. The terrifying power of dark ice filled every corner of the space. The aura was extremely terrifying, like an avalanche. The eyes of the crowd trembled. The icy death boundary in the sky had been completely filled with dancing frost, and it was impossible to see the figures clearly. However, the coldness that came from the boundary was bone-chilling, and it made the crowd uncontrollably retreat. Nie Tian was shocked by the scene in front of him. He did not expect Huang Fu Zhongxing's strength to be so terrifying. The entire icy death boundary was completely covered in frost, and it looked like a huge ice ball floating in the sky. After a long time, the frost in the icy death boundary gradually weakened, and a figure appeared in front of the crowd. It was precisely Huang Fu Zhongxing, cold, elegant, and peerless. Chapter 2587. The Ghost King appears, the Master of Ice Tower. The crowd exclaimed when they saw the face of the figure. They were completely dumbfounded, and the shock in their hearts could not be any greater. Huang Fu Zhongxing stood there like an iceberg that had not moved for tens of thousands of years. He was so cold that he seemed to be isolated from the world. There was no doubt that she had won the battle against 3 old ancestors at the same time. Everyone's eyes were focused on Huang Fu Zhongxing. Shock, dread, fear, and admiration formed the most complicated look in their eyes. A moment later, the frost and snow in the frost-death barrier disappeared completely. However, the 3 giant coffins were nowhere to be seen in the huge barrier. There was only a figure that was as thin as a skeleton standing there, trembling and swaying like a withered leaf in the wind that was about to wither at any time. It was the figure of the old ancestor of thousands of babies. Both Old Ancestor Flowing Kill and Old Ancestor Ni Yun were killed directly. The Old Ancestor of thousands of babies had lost the coffins of thousands of babies. He had sacrificed countless extreme infants to refine the coffins of thousands of babies. However, they were so vulnerable in front of Huang Fu Zhongxing, a true powerhouse. How is this possible? The old ancestor of thousands of babies suddenly raised his head and looked at Huang Fu Zhongxing with his turbid eyes. The shock in his heart was written on his face. He could not imagine that Huang Fu Zhongxing's strength could be so powerful. Old ancestor of thousands of babies, it's time to pay with your blood, Huang Fu Zhongxing said coldly. His eyes were cold as he walked toward the old ancestor step by step. With every step he took, the killing intent and coldness in the air became stronger. Patriarch 10,000 infants' body trembled like a small sapling in the cold wind, bending over. Die. Huang Fu Zhongxing did not waste any time. He growled and raised his palm. Stop. However, at that moment, a hoarse and deep voice rang out in the air. Boom. Following that, a gust of extremely gloomy energy whistled out and suddenly descended, bombarding the ice-death boundary. Huang Fu Zhongxing was hit by the impact. His body shook and he took a few steps back. Bang! In the next moment, the enormous ice death barrier shook with a loud bang and collapsed into pieces. Boundless coldness surged out and transformed into frost and snow that filled the sky. This sudden scene caused everyone to raise their heads. They saw a black-clothed figure standing high in the sky. He wore a devil mask, and his body gave off a dark aura. It was like a massive dark vortex, making people feel as if they would sink into darkness if they looked at him. It was precisely this masked black-clothed man that had obstructed Huangfu Zhangsheng. This person's aura is so dark. Nie Tian stared at the ghost-faced cultivator and his eyes suddenly trembled, unable to conceal the surprise in his eyes. This grim-faced cultivator broke Huangfu Zhangsheng's ice-death barrier the moment he made a move. His strength was unimaginable. His appearance attracted everyone's attention. "Who are you?" Huangfu Zhangsheng steadied herself, and her beautiful eyes flickered as she roared in a low voice. "Great Ghost King!" At this moment, the patriarchs of the thousands of babies looked at the cultivator with the ghost mask, and their turbid eyes suddenly lit up. They were overjoyed and shouted, "Ghost King!" The crowd's expressions changed when they heard the voice of the patriarchs of the thousands of babies. Their gazes toward the cultivator with the ghost mask were instantly filled with fear. There were 2 Supremacy Realm experts in the Ghost Corp's 13 coffins. One was a Corpse Lord and the other was a Ghost King. The Corpse Lord and the Ghost King were the strongest cultivators in the Ghost Corp's 13 coffins. How could the crowd not be shocked when they heard the Ghost King's name? Who would have thought that even the Ghost King would come in person? The Ghost King stood high in the sky and stared at Huangfu Zhangsheng with a pair of emotionless eyes, but he did not say anything. "Old Wan." At this moment, a huge coffin appeared behind the Ghost King, and a shocked voice came from the coffin. "9-bone in coffin." Nie Tian's eyes widened when he saw the coffin, and he almost screamed. The aura of the coffin was exactly the same as the 9-bone in coffin he had seen before, except that it was stronger. Without a doubt, this coffin was the heavenly coffin of the 9-bone in coffin. The spiritual heart of 10,000 woods was taken by the owner of the ominous coffin of the thousands of babies and the 9-bone in coffin. How could Nie Tian not be excited when both of them appeared at the same time? Old Jiu. The ominous coffin of the thousands of babies raised their heads and sighed when they saw the 9-bone in coffin. Saying this, his figure moved slightly, and he walked toward the Ghost King step by step. With the Ghost King watching him, he believed that he was safe. "I'll kill you!" Huangfu Zhangsheng's eyes flickered when she saw the figure of the patriarchs of the thousands of babies. She could no longer suppress her anger, so she let out a roar and charged forward. The enemy who killed her brother was right in front of her. How could she let him go? "How dare you!" However, at this moment the Ghost King spoke again. Lung let out a deep roar and thrust his palm forward. An extremely evil force was unleashed at the speed of a rainbow. Puff! In the next instant, Huangfu Zhangsheng's figure swayed, and her shoulder was penetrated by the evil force. She was sent flying, drawing a bloody arc in the air. "Ant!" Huangfu Hong let out a scream when he saw this. He flew over and caught Huangfu Zhangsheng. "Hong-er!" Huangfu Zhangsheng stabilized her figure and glanced at Huangfu Hong. Her face was extremely pale, without any color of blood. Her eyes were filled with unwillingness, and her heart was surging with uncontrollable anger. She was only 1 step away from killing her brother's enemy, but she was stopped by the Ghost King. How could she not be angry? Nie Tian looked at the Ghost King from afar with a strange and complicated expression, as if he was thinking about something. The crowd was stunned when they looked at Huangfu Zhangsheng. Huangfu Zhangsheng's strength was already beyond imagination, but in front of the Ghost King, she was powerless to fight back. In fact, in the battle just now, Huangfu Zhangsheng had already defeated the 4 coffins and killed 3 of them. She had already exhausted too much of her strength. Under normal circumstances, she might not be able to win against the Ghost King, but she definitely wouldn't be in a situation where she couldn't fight back at all. At this moment, the old ancestor of the thousands of babies came to the Ghost King's side, bowed slightly, and retreated to the side. Ice Tower Master, you're a respectable expert, but you shouldn't have killed the ice, fire, and thunder ancestors. Then, the Ghost King spoke in a low and hoarse voice, with a trace of pity in his tone. Then, the Ghost King said in a deep voice, "Kill her." This sentence was obviously an order for the 9-bone coffin. Huangfu Zhongxing was already seriously injured and no longer had the strength to fight. "Yes." A deep voice came from the 9-bone coffin. Then, the giant coffin moved, and a human bone chain that looked like a black iron chain appeared, pressing down on Huangfu Zhongxing and Huangfu Hong with great murderous intent. Huangfu Zhongxing couldn't resist, and Huangfu Hong was too weak to resist. The lives of the aunt and nephew were hanging by a thread. Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and his figure moved, preparing to make a move. But at this moment, an incomparably powerful sword shadow suddenly fell from the sky, falling from the sky like a huge waterfall. Boom! In the next instant, the sword shadow fell, and the human bone chain in the air directly shattered. Chapter 2588. Chapter 2588. Chapter 2588. Sword Saint Lingyun. As the sword shadow landed, progenitor Jiugu let out a cry of agony. The 9-bone coffin was forced back a few hundred meters by the powerful sword aura. The sudden change caused the Ghost King's eyes to narrow. He raised his head and looked into the sky. He could see a figure in green standing there with a faint sword intent flowing around his body. Although his aura was not strong, it gave off a mysterious feeling. The person who saved Huangfu Zhongxing was this swordsman. "Lord Ghost King, since when have you become so shameless? Bullying a woman and a junior? Are the people of the Ghoul Corp's 13 coffins all so shameless?" The figure of the green-robed swordsman landed and said with a faint smile while looking at the Ghost King. The crowd was stunned and completely dumbfounded. Who would have thought that someone would stand out and help Huangfu Zhongxing and his niece at this moment? The person standing opposite them was the Ghost King of the Ghoul Corp's 13 coffins. However, the attitude of the green-robed swordsman was very calm without the slightest hint of fear. Instead, he seemed to be joking. Most importantly, the face of the green-robed swordsman was unfamiliar. He did not seem to be from the 7 major sections. Who was this person? How dare he go against the Ghost King? Nie Tian frowned as he looked at the green-robed swordsman. Judging from the attack of the green-robed swordsman, his sword intent was even more terrifying than Mu Hongliu's. His sword Dao was definitely at the 3rd level of the transcendent god realm. It seemed like the swordsman of the frozen ruins was not any weaker than the swordsman of the Forsaken Land. "Uncle Yen." Not far away from Nie Tian, Feng Qi murmured as he stared at the green-robed swordsman. "Feng Qi, do you know this senior?" Nie Tian frowned when he heard Feng Qi's voice. Feng Qi nodded, but he was stunned on the spot. He was too surprised to see the green-robed swordsman here. "Yen Lingyun, you'd better not interfere with the matter of the Ghoul Corp's 13 coffins." At this moment the Ghost King spoke. He coldly stared at the green-robed swordsman and called out his name. As soon as the Ghost King finished speaking, the crowd below immediately exploded. "Yen Lingyun, he is Yen Lingyun, he is Sword Saint Lingyun. Sword Saint Lingyun, it's actually Sword Saint Lingyun, no wonder he dared to go against the Ghoul 13 coffins. The Saint of Swords truly lives up to his name. I wonder who is more powerful, Sword Sage Lingyun or Ghost King." The crowd was shouting madly. The way they looked at Yen Lingyun was filled with worship, as if they were looking at a god. Soaring Cloud Sword Saint. When Nie Tian heard the crowd's frenzied cries, his eyes involuntarily trembled, and a look of astonishment appeared on his face. He was no stranger to the name Soaring Cloud Sword Saint. Back at the Shadow Mountain, Feng Qi had mentioned the matter of sword sage soaring cloud pursuing Bloodwing ancestor. He did not expect to meet this legendary swordsman so soon. No wonder Feng Qi was so surprised when he saw Yenlingyun. Just now, Feng Qi called Soaring Cloud Sword Saint Yenlingyun as Uncle Yen. It seems like the two of them are very close. Nye Tian suddenly recalled how Feng Qi addressed Yenlingyun just now. His gaze involuntarily darkened, and he became even more curious about Feng Qi's true identity. From the crowd's attitude towards Yenlingyun's reputation in the frozen remains was truly great. In the frozen remains there were two great swordsmen who stood at the peak of the sword world. One was Soaring Cloud Sword Saint, and the other was Selfless Sword Demon. Of the two, one was a saint of swords, and the other was a demon of swords. Yenlingyun's reputation was great, but those who had actually seen his lineup were few and far between. At this moment, Yenlingyun looked at the Ghost King with a faint smile on his lips and said, "Ghost King, I like to meddle in other people's business, so I will definitely interfere in the matters of the ice building." The Ghost King's eyes turned cold. Clearly, he did not expect Yenlingyun to be so insolent, completely ignoring his threat. "Yenlingyun, you better think it through. Your interference might cause a commotion in the frozen remains. I think the person behind you also does not wish to see such a scene." The Ghost King calmed down slightly, and his eyes darkened as he spoke once again. "Ghost King, aren't you thinking too highly of yourself?" Yenlingyun smiled again and said, "Do you think that a mere 13 ghoul corpse coffin can threaten the entire frozen remains? You are thinking too much if you want to use the person behind me to suppress me." "Yenlingyun, you." The Ghost King's eyes trembled, and the face under the mask was so gloomy that it looked like it was about to drip blood. With Yenlingyun being so insolent, how could he, the Ghost King, stand alone in front of so many people? "Ghost King, don't have any misgivings. If you want to make a move, I will accompany you." Yenlingyun saw that the Ghost King was extremely angry, but he smiled again and said, "Don't worry. Since I came to Fengdu Ghost City, my life is my own. If I die in your hands, I, Yenlingyun, will accept it. I will absolutely not let anyone find you for revenge. How about it? Do you dare to fight? Let me experience just how supreme the 13 ghoul corpse coffin's supreme powerhouses are." The calm words that carried ridicule were like steel needles stabbing into the Ghost King's heart when they landed in his ears. "Yenlingyun, do you really think that I don't dare to kill you?" the Ghost King said coldly. If he did not still have a shred of rationality, he would definitely directly attack Yenlingyun at this moment. "You dare." Yenlingyun smiled calmly, his tone extremely provocative, and said, "But the problem is, do you have the ability to kill me? Yenlingyun, don't provoke the bottom line of my tolerance anymore." The Ghost King gave a deep low roar, a pair of eyes surging with terrifying flames. His entire person was like a wild beast, about to lose control in the next instant. Yenlingyun's expression was still calm, and he said with a smile, "Ghost King, don't be so angry. If you and I fight, no one will gain any advantage. Why not talk calmly and peacefully?" He was very smart and knew when to stop. He did not go and excessively enrage the Ghost King. Honestly speaking, he did not have absolute confidence to fight the Ghost King. "Yenlingyun, what do you want?" The Ghost King gave a cold, low roar. "It's very simple. The matter of the ice cloud will end here." Yenlingyun smiled lightly and said, "The ancestor of thousands of babies killed Huangfu Zhangxing's older brother, and Huangfu Zhangxing killed the ice, fire, and lightning ancestors. So let's leave it at that for today. If you want to take revenge in the future, then do it in the future." "Lord Ghost King, what do you think of my suggestion?" "Nonsense." The Ghost King roared furiously and said furiously, "Huangfu Zhangfeng's death was something that happened a long time ago, and she, Huangfu Zhangxing, just killed 3 owners of the Sky Coffin." Yenlingyun was stunned, and then his eyes flickered as he said, Is there a difference between killing them a long time ago and killing them now? You. When the Ghost King saw Yan Lingyun's serious expression, his chest instantly felt heavy, and he wished for nothing more than to spit out a mouthful of blood. Ghost King, let's just forget about this matter. If you have any grudges, we can talk about it in the future. The corner of Yan Lingyun's mouth twitched as she said with a smile, and at the same time, she turned around and prepared to leave. Auntie. But at this time, Huang Fu Hong suddenly yelled out. He was very panicked. Huang Fu Zhongxing suddenly collapsed in front of him, and his life aura rapidly disappeared. Seeing this, Nie Tian frowned and moved over in a flash. He directly released the energy of the Terra vein source, and continuously inserted it into Huang Fu Zhongxing's body. Humph. At this moment the Ghost King sneered and said, "She's seriously injured by me, she's dead for sure." Nie Tian paid no attention to the Ghost King, and frantically released the energy of the Terra vein source, but he discovered that he was completely unable to stop Huang Fu Zhongxing's life aura from disappearing. In the next moment, Nie Tian suddenly realized something, and his expression suddenly changed as he exclaimed in his heart, "This is the extreme demon energy." Chapter 2589. Chapter 2589. Chapter 2589. I can save her. The Ghost King floated high in the sky, staring unblinkingly at Nie Tian with his abyss-like eyes. The waves of shock in his heart were indescribable. It was as if he had discovered some heaven-shaking secrets from Nie Tian. His body trembled slightly. Although he did not speak, anyone could tell that he was very agitated at the moment. "Lord Ghost King, are you all right?" The patriarch of the thousands of babies could not help but ask softly when he noticed the Ghost King's strange expression. "God-fiend nascent embryo." The Ghost King ignored him and murmured 4 words. He never thought that he would meet someone with a God-fiend nascent embryo here. On the other side, Nie Tian's eyes were also filled with astonishment. In fact, when he saw the Ghost King attack earlier, he felt that the latter's aura was a bit similar to the power of Extreme Fiend, but he was not sure. At this moment, he came to Huang Fu Zhongxing's side and carefully sensed the power in the latter's body. He finally confirmed that the power used by the Ghost King was indeed the power of Extreme Fiend. This was something he never expected. He did not expect to meet someone who used the power of Extreme Fiend here. However, the strange thing was that the Ghost King's power of Extreme Fiend seemed a little strange. This aura was not pure power of Extreme Fiend, but a fusion of another type of supreme evil force, so it was stronger. This was also the reason why Nie Tian did not immediately confirm if the Ghost King was using the power of Extreme Fiend. There was one more thing that puzzled Nie Tian even more. He did not sense the aura of the power of Extreme Fiend on the Ghost King. Therefore, he was not sure if the Ghost King was a member of Qi Wu's family. It would be too careless to determine that the Ghost King was a member of Qi Wu's family just because he used the power of Extreme Fiend. Given the Ghost King's identity and strength, it was very possible that he had used some means to steal the power of Extreme Fiend. He found out that I have the God-fiend nascent embryo, Nie Tian thought to himself as he looked at the Ghost King and saw the latter's reaction. His God-fiend nascent embryo's aura was very well hidden, so it was difficult for ordinary people to discover it. However, since the Ghost King could use the extreme demon power, he must have a special reaction to the God-fiend nascent embryo's aura. It wasn't strange for him to discover the God-fiend nascent embryo. "Nie Tian, how is my aunt?" At this time, Huang Fu Hong suddenly asked. "I'm sorry, I've tried my best." Nie Tian suddenly reacted. His expression was incomparably solemn as he said in a deep voice. Even though he was constantly releasing the power of the Terra vein source, he was still unable to save Huang Fu Zhongxing. At this moment, Huang Fu Zhongxing was already on the verge of death, and the last bit of vitality he possessed was swiftly withering away. "Auntie!" Huang Fu Hong was stunned for a moment, then he cried out loudly. His father was dead, and his aunt was the closest person to him in the world. On the other hand, if Huang Fu Zhongxing were to die as well, then it would undoubtedly be a calamity to the entire ice pavilion. Huang Fu Zhongxing was the master of the ice tower, the strongest expert of the ice tower. He was also the guarantee that the ice tower could be ranked among the 7 great sections. With Huang Fu Zhongxing's death, the ice tower would fall from the 7 great sects, and its future would be uncertain. Nie Tian furrowed his brows and suddenly raised his head to look at the Ghost King. He felt that if the Ghost King was willing to save someone, perhaps Huang Fu Zhongxing would have a chance of survival. However, was he really going to ask the Ghost King for help? Right now, the Ghost King's identity was still uncertain. What if he was not from Qi Wu's family, but someone who had stolen the extreme demon fetus? At this time, the Ghost King looked at Nie Tian and suddenly said, "I can save her." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and he could not help but be stunned for a moment. The Ghost King took the initiative to speak. This was something that he did not expect. In the next moment, the crowd was also stunned. They looked at the Ghost King in a daze, as if they were wondering if they had heard wrongly. Who would have thought that the Ghost King would suddenly say such a thing? Just a moment ago, the Ghost King was trying his best to kill Huang Fu Zhongxing, but now, he opened his mouth to save Huang Fu Zhongxing. This change in attitude was too fast and too strange. The patriarch of the thousands of babies beside the Ghost King was stunned for a few seconds before he finally reacted and asked in a trembling voice, "Lord Ghost King, what did you say?" The Ghost King ignored him but looked at Nie Tian and said, "Kid, I can save Huang Fu Zhongxing, but you have to promise me one condition." "Me?" Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. His brows were tightly furrowed, and he had a puzzled look. "Ghost King, what the hell are you doing?" Yan Lingyun stood not far away and asked cold, obviously a little anxious. "Kid, Huang Fu Zhongxing doesn't have much time left. Are you willing to agree to my suggestion?" The Ghost King ignored Yan Lingyun and asked as he looked at Nie Tian with a deep gaze. Nie Tian frowned, obviously a little hesitant. The Ghost King did not directly state the condition and wanted him to agree. This made him have no choice but to be cautious. What if the Ghost King dug a pit and waited for him to jump in? "Nie Tian, I beg you, save my aunt." Just as Nie Tian was hesitating, Huang Fu Hong suddenly did something shocking. He knelt before Nie Tian and begged bitterly. "Huang Fu Hong, get up quickly." Nie Tian did not expect Huang Fu Hong to suddenly kneel and hurriedly took a step forward to support the latter. But Huang Fu Hong was very resolute. If Nie Tian did not agree, he was unwilling to get up. To him, Huang Fu Zhongxing was not just his aunt but more like a father and mother. How could he watch the former die without doing anything? Now, Nie Tian was the only person who could save Huang Fu Zhongxing. As long as he said the word, the Ghost King would save him. Nie Tian looked at Huang Fu Zhongxing and his gaze suddenly trembled. He recalled the moment when he saved his mother in the dark sea-black prison. For his mother, he could disregard everything. Wasn't Huang Fu Hong the same for his aunt? With empathy, Nie Tian looked at the Ghost King and said directly, "I promise you." "Good." The Ghost King's eyes suddenly trembled and he seemed very excited. In the next moment, his figure moved and directly descended to Huang Fu Zhongxing's side and began to treat the latter. At this moment, Nie Tian was only tens of meters away from the Ghost King and could clearly feel the latter's aura. At this moment, he really felt how strong the Ghost King's Yin and evil aura was. The Ghost King merely stood there, and the Yin aura in the space was very strong, making people feel indescribably suffocated. But what Nie Tian was more concerned about was whether the Ghost King had the aura of the extreme demon fetus. "I still can't feel the extreme demon fetus. Is his extreme demon power really stolen?" After carefully sensing, Nie Tian frowned and thought to himself. At the same time, his expression was slightly ugly. "Okay. She's fine. She'll recover after a few days of rest." At this moment, the Ghost King spoke faintly, and then his figure moved and returned to his original position. After a moment, Huangfu Zhangxing woke up and his aura gradually became stable. Nie Tian let out a long breath and was relieved. He was also very happy to be able to save Huangfu Zhangxing. Huangfu Zhangxing was not only Huangfu Hong's aunt but also Jun Aoqing's savior. "Kid, it's time for us to talk about the conditions." At this moment the Ghost King spoke. His eyes were extremely dark as he stared at Nie Tian and said, "Lord Ghost King, don't be anxious." Nie Tian was very calm and said with a faint smile, "I still have a small condition. I hope Lord Ghost King can agree to it." "What condition?" The Ghost King's eyes were dull, and he was obviously a little angry, but he still asked. Chapter 2590. The Ghost King's Forbidden Realm, the Heart of All Wood? The Ghost King was surprised to hear Nie Tian's words. He didn't know where the Heart of All Wood was. Why did Nie Tian want it? "Yes, I want the Heart of All Wood," Nie Tian nodded and said. "I don't have the Heart of All Wood with me," the Ghost King said coldly. "Lord Ghost King doesn't have it, but the people around you do." Nie Tian smiled and looked at Patriarch 10,000 Infants, who was behind the Ghost King. The ancestors of thousands of babies were stunned and didn't dare to look at Nie Tian. Ghost King's eyes darkened. He looked at old ancestor Wan Ing and asked, "Wan Ing, do you have the spiritual heart of 10,000 wood?" "I." Patriarch Myriad Infant's eyes flickered as he stuttered. "Hand it over," the Ghost King growled. He didn't want to waste time. "Yes, yes, yes." The ancestors of thousands of babies trembled and nodded. Then, he raised his hand and a green ball of light appeared in his palm. A strong aura of life was released and circulated in the air. "It really is the Myriad Wood Spirit Heart." Looking at the glowing green sphere, Nie Tian's eyes flickered, and he almost cried out. He had seen the Heart of All Wood in the Dark Emperor's body before. He couldn't be wrong. The difference was that the green ball of light before him was much stronger than the Heart of All Wood in the Dark Emperor's body. "Nie Tian, this is only half of the 10,000 wood spirit heart," Little Fat Cat's voice suddenly rang out, reminding Nie Tian. "Half." Nie Tian's eyes widened as he realized what was going on. He turned to the 9-bone coffin and said coldly, "You have the other half of the spirit heart of all wood spirits, right? Kid, you!" Ancestor Jiugu screamed in anger. But before he could finish, the Ghost King interrupted him. "Hand it over, Jiugu," the Ghost King said coldly, issuing a command to Patriarch Jiugu. Ancestor 9 Bones fell silent for a moment. A few seconds later, he handed over the Myriad Wood Spirit Heart. Above the 9-bone coffin, a green ball of light appeared and floated there, releasing an extremely dense aura of life. The Ghost King raised his hand and the two green balls of light fused together in the air. Immediately, the life aura in the air grew even stronger. It was endless and endless. "The spirit heart of all wood, take it." The Ghost King did not even look at it and directly threw the spirit heart of all wood to Nie Tian. He did not care at all. "Thank you, Lord Ghost King." Nie Tian took the Myriad Wood spiritual heart and put it into the 9 extremes. However, at this moment, he was even more worried. Just what did the Ghost King want him to do? It was so important that he even gave him the wood origin energy so casually. The more magnanimous the Ghost King was, the more uncertain Nie Tian felt. The crowd was also stunned at this moment. Their eyes moved back and forth between Nie Tian and the Ghost King in disbelief. They did not know what had happened to cause the Ghost King's attitude to change so abruptly. Many people present knew what the spirit heart of all wood was, but the Ghost King had so easily given it to Nie Tian. It was really too confusing. Could it be that there's some sort of relationship between the Ghost King and this silver-haired kid? Yen Lingyun thought to herself as she watched from the side, staring at Nie Tian with a burning gaze. Feng Qi was also confused. He thought to himself, it seems that Nie Tian's identity is not simple. At this moment, the Ghost King looked at Nye Tian and said in a deep voice, "Kid, can we talk about the conditions now?" "Sure." Nye Tian smiled faintly and was very calm. The Ghost King nodded and said very seriously, "Your name is Nye Tian, right?" "Yes." Nye Tian nodded. He looked very calm on the surface, but he was a little nervous on the inside. "Very well." The Ghost King laughed and said, "Come with me." Nye Tian's gaze froze. He could not hide the nervousness in his eyes. "Don't worry, I won't kill you." The Ghost King smiled faintly and said, "Your life is very important to me." "Yes." Nye Tian nodded and then looked at Jun Ouching and said, "I'll be back soon." Jun Ouching nodded. Of course, she understood that the Ghost King did not want others to follow him. Nye Tian was still a little worried. He turned to look at Feng Qi and said, "Feng Qi, I'll leave Jun Ouching and the others to you." "Yes." The corner of Feng Qi's mouth twitched and he smiled faintly. With Sword Sage Lingyun by Feng Qi's side, Nye Tian was very relieved. Then, Nye Tian followed the Ghost King and left. After a while, the two figures appeared in a remote area outside the ghost city of Plentiful City. Nye Tian came to a stop and kept a distance of several hundred meters from the Ghost King as he said in a deep voice, "Tell me your terms, Lord Ghost King." "Nye Tian, the Ghost King's tomb has opened. You know about this, right?" The Ghost King's back was facing Nye Tian and his voice was deep and powerful. "Everyone in the frozen ruins knows about it." "Of course I know." Nye Tian smiled faintly and replied. The opening of the Ghost King's tomb had already spread throughout the frozen ruins. The reason why the seven sects appeared at this time was because of this. Nye Tian, the opening of the Ghost King's tomb and the people from the seven sects can enter. Don't you think it strange? The Ghost King suddenly asked after a moment of silence. Nye Tian was stunned for a moment and then he frowned. The opening of the Ghost King's tomb was a grand event in the frozen ruins. The Ghost Corp's 13 coffins controlled the ghost city of Plentiful City and could have prohibited the seven sects from entering. However, they opened the gates of the ghost city of Plentiful City at this time. This was indeed a bit strange. Logically speaking, the Ghost Corp's 13 coffins could completely seal the ghost city of Plentiful City and not allow outsiders to enter. But why did they allow the people from the seven sects to enter the Ghost King's tomb? Lord Ghost King, if you have something to say, just say it. Nye Tian didn't want to beat around the bush and directly asked. The Ghost King laughed and threw something to Nye Tian. Nye Tian caught the thing and looked at it. It was the map of the Ghost King's tomb. On the map, everything in the Ghost King's tomb was marked in detail, including all kinds of arrays and barriers. Lord Ghost King, what do you mean by giving me the map? Nye Tian frowned and asked with a puzzled look. The Ghost King turned around and stared at Nye Tian with a pair of dark eyes and said, "Nye Tian, do you see the dark area at the center of the map?" Nye Tian frowned. Sure enough, he saw a black spot at the center of the map. It wasn't big, and its real size was estimated to be around 1 kilometer. The entire Ghost King's tomb was marked in detail. Only the black spot at the center was very strange. The surroundings were empty, there was nothing. Nye Tian, I want you to enter the forbidden area of the Ghost King and open a space-time gate inside. The Ghost King said in a deep voice, his eyes gloomy. A space-time gate? Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and he asked in surprise, "What kind of gate is this space-time gate?" From the Ghost King's current expression, this space-time gate must be very mysterious. Chapter 2591. The Gate to the Sacred World. The Gate to the All-Heaven Sacred World? Nye Tian's eyes narrowed when he heard the Ghost King's words, and he froze on the spot. The Ghost King had already expected this reaction from Nye Tian. He waited for the latter to react before saying, "As long as you open the gate, I'm willing to enter the All-Heaven Sacred World with you." Nye Tian became much colder, but his eyes were still trembling slightly. He said, "Lord Ghost King, are you sure there's a gate in the Ghost Emperor's Forbidden Zone?" "I'm sure." The Ghost King nodded firmly. Nie Tian's eyes trembled slightly and he nodded. He finally understood why the Ghost King was so generous. Not only did he save Huangfu Zhangxing, but he also gave him the 10,000 wood spiritual heart. It was all for the gate to the sacred world. The gate to the all-heaven sacred world was the gate to the all-heaven sacred world. All the cultivators in the realms yearned for the legendary all-heaven sacred world. If he could enter the all-heaven sacred world, would he be far from becoming a sage? After a while, Nie Tian calmed down completely and asked in a deep voice, Lord Ghost King, how can you be so sure that I can open the gate of Saint World? Because you're a demon god fetus. The Ghost King stared at Nie Tian with a burning gaze and said with certainty, just because I'm a demon god fetus, you're so sure that I can open the gate? Nie Tian asked with a frown after being stunned for a moment. Yes. The Ghost King nodded but did not explain anything. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He knew that the Ghost King was unwilling to say anything more, so he did not continue asking. Nie Tian, you're an extremely talented person. If you enter the all-heaven sacred world with me, we'll definitely be able to make a name for ourselves in the all-heaven sacred world if we work together, the Ghost King said excitedly as he looked at Nie Tian. Sorry, I'm not interested in the all-heaven sacred world. Nie Tian's reaction was very calm, even cold. The Ghost King looked at Nie Tian and was stunned for a moment, as if he thought he had heard wrong. It was hard to imagine that Nie Tian would actually say that he had no interest in the all-heavens sacred world. The all-heavens sacred world was equivalent to becoming a saint. There were countless martial artists in the myriad domain. Which one of them did not want to become a sage? Nie Tian's reaction was far beyond Ghost King's expectations. Actually, it wasn't that Nie Tian didn't want to enter the all-heavens sacred world. It was just that he still had a lot of unfinished business. He would not consider entering the all-heaven saints' world before he completed what he wanted to do. On top of that, he was just too weak. If he entered the all-heaven saints' world, he would be no different from an ant. Any random person would be able to crush him. Lord Ghost King, if you want to enter the all-heaven sacred world, I can help you open the sacred world gate. Then, Nie Tian smiled and stared at the Ghost King. But since I've helped you so much, shouldn't you repay me a little? What else do you want? The Ghost King's eyes turned cold. He was obviously angry. He had already saved Huangfu Zhangxing's life and given the 10,000 woods spiritual heart to Nie Tian. Was that not enough? Wasn't Nie Tian a little too greedy to ask for more now? Lord Ghost King, don't be agitated. The repayment I want is very simple. I just want to ask Lord Ghost King about a person. Nie Tian smiled and said a name, Qi Wuxiong. Qi Wuxiong was the name of the Qi Wu family's ancestor. Before Nie Tian came to the frozen ruins, Qi Sha and Lian Jiufeng had found him and asked him to look for the Qi Wu family's ancestor and the Nie family's ancestor. If he could find these two people, he could exchange them for information about Nie Tian's father. Previously, when Nie Tian sensed the extreme demon power from the Ghost King, he naturally guessed that the Ghost King was the Qi Wu family's ancestor, Qi Wuxiong. Both Qi Wuxiong and Nie Donghuang knew that there were other domains outside the 9 regions. Therefore, it was very likely that they had left the 9 regions and gone to other domains. Therefore, it was not strange for Qi Wuxiong to appear here. Most importantly, the Ghost King could use the extreme demon power. Therefore, even if he was not Qi Wuxiong, he must be related to the Qi Wu family. In this world, other than the extreme demon fetus, there was no other power that could release the extreme demon power. When the Ghost King heard the name Qi Wuxiong, his eyes suddenly trembled. He said directly, I don't know this person. Nie Tian was stunned. He felt very strange. The Ghost King's reaction did not seem like he did not know Qi Wuxiong. But the Ghost King was obviously avoiding this question. Lord Ghost King, this. Nie Tian thought for a moment and wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by the Ghost King. I said, I don't know Qi Wuxiong, the Ghost King growled. He was very angry. Seeing the Ghost King's reaction, Nie Tian could not help but feel even more strange. It was obvious that the Ghost King and Qi Wuxiong had an extraordinary relationship, but the Ghost King did not want to say more, so Nie Tian could not continue asking. Since that's the case, then I'll take my leave. When the Ghost Emperor's tomb is completely opened, I will enter and help you open the gate of the sacred world. Nie Tian thought for a moment and said lightly. After saying that, he turned around and was ready to leave. The Ghost Emperor's tomb was completely opened in half a month. During this half a month, Nie Tian could not follow the Ghost King. Wait. At this time, the Ghost King suddenly called out to Nie Tian. Lord Ghost King, is there anything else? Nie Tian's body paused and he turned around to ask. Nie Tian, your Godfiend nascent embryo has only awakened one Godfiend power, right? The Ghost King's eyes were gloomy as he asked. Yes. Nie Tian did not hide it and nodded. Previously, his Godfiend nascent embryo had awakened thousands of Godfiend power, but some accidents happened and the Godfiend power underwent a qualitative change, so only one was awakened. Release your Godfiend power and let me see. The Ghost King looked at Nie Tian and said in a deep voice. Nie Tian did not know what the Ghost King was going to do, but he still nodded and released his Godfiend power. Too weak. The Ghost King sensed Nie Tian's Godfiend power and said, if you want to open the gate of the sacred world, you need to awaken at least 4 Godfiend power. Nie Tian's brow furrowed as his expression froze. In the past, his Godfiend power was awakened as his strength increased. Now, he had only awakened 1 Godfiend power. It would be difficult for him to awaken 4 Godfiend power. Lord Ghost King, if that's the case, I can't help you. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched, and he said helplessly. The Ghost King stared at Nie Tian and said, I'll help you awaken the Godfiend power. Nie Tian was stunned and his face was filled with shock. Could it be that the Ghost King had a special method to help awaken the Godfiend power? But the problem was the Ghost King trustworthy? The Ghost King could tell what Nie Tian was thinking. He smiled cold and said, Nie Tian, do you have a choice now? After saying that, the Ghost King suddenly stretched out his hand, and an incomparably powerful force suddenly descended on Nie Tian's body. Chapter 2592. Enraged Nie Tian. Nie Tian did not expect the Ghost King to make a move so suddenly. But even if he had, it would have been useless. In front of an expert like the Ghost King, he had no way of fighting back. At this moment, Nie Tian felt the pressure surging around him. It was much more terrifying than the pressure from the thousands of babies, but the terrifying pressure did not directly press down on him, or he would have been crushed into meat paste. Don't try to resist, feel the power around you. At this time, the Ghost King's voice rang out. His entire body emitted boundless demonic energy, like a rolling wave, crashing into Nie Tian's body. The Ghost King had used the demonic energy to stimulate the Godfiend nascent embryo, awakening the demonic energy in the embryo in advance. Nie Tian frowned, his expression was very ugly. He hated the feeling of being manipulated by others, but he had no other choice but to listen to the Ghost King. Next, Nie Tian no longer resisted, but carefully felt the demonic energy surging around him. Slowly, he felt the extreme devil power slowly seeping into his body, attacking the sea of fiend gods and demons in strands. It was a very strange feeling, as if there was an invisible hand slowly stirring the sea of demons and gods. Boom! After an unknown period of time, Nie Tian suddenly felt a force rushing out of the sea of demons and gods, causing his body to tremble. It really awakened. In the next moment, he immediately reacted and shouted in joy. Under the stimulation of the demonic energy, Nie Tian really awakened a strand of demonic energy. Then, after a long time, the third strand of demonic energy awakened. And after a long time, the fourth strand of demonic energy awakened. But the Ghost King did not give up. He wanted to continue to stimulate the demonic energy. But after a long time, the sea of demons and gods remained calm. 4 strands of demonic energy, this is your current limit. The Ghost King finally gave up, the demonic energy dissipated, and his sharp eyes showed signs of fatigue. Nye Tian steadied himself and looked at the Ghost King, not knowing what to say. The Ghost King didn't hurt him, but he didn't like this method of coercion. Nye Tian, the Ghost Emperor's tomb will open in 10 days. I'll send someone to find you then. The Ghost King looked at Nye Tian and spoke in a deep voice. Then, his figure flickered and he left. Looking in the direction where the Ghost King had disappeared, Nye Tian's brows furrowed tightly, the doubts in his heart growing heavier. He did not know the true identity of the Ghost King. When he mentioned Qi Wuxiong's name, the Ghost King became visibly excited. Ghost King, even if you're not Qi Wuxiong, you're still closely related to him, Nye Tian said in a deep voice, a sharp light surging in his eyes. Following this, he did not linger any longer. With a flash, he left the place. After a while, Nye Tian arrived at the main street of Fengdu Ghost City. The crowd had long since dispersed, and Jun Aoqing and the others were nowhere to be seen. It seems they've already left, Nye Tian said. Let's go check out the Fengdu restaurant. Smiling faintly, he made his way toward the restaurant. The Ghost King had spent a lot of time awakening his devil god power, so it was only natural that Jun Aoqing and the others would leave early. Furthermore, with Sword Sage Cloud soaring by his side, no one would be able to hurt Jun Aoqing and the others. Although Nye Tian had awakened 4 types of devil god power, he was still a late paramount god. He could sense that he was on the verge of a breakthrough, but if he wanted to, he would need to wait for the right opportunity. Before long, Nye Tian arrived at the Fengdu restaurant, where he saw Feng Qi waiting for him outside. You're back, Nye Tian. Feng Qi was very happy to see Nye Tian. Smiling faintly, Nye Tian flashed over to Feng Qi and asked, Is House Lord Huang Fu alright? His aura is back to normal, just a bit weak. He'll be fine after a few days of rest. Feng Qi nodded and smiled. Huang Fu Hong is very grateful to you. He's willing to do anything you ask of him. Nye Tian chuckled, but didn't know what to say. He hadn't saved Huang Fu Chongqing because of Huang Fu Hong's gratitude. At this time, Feng Qi suddenly froze. Looking around, he asked curiously, Where is Miss June? Didn't she come back with you? No. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and his heart sank. Wasn't she with you the whole time? Feng Qi also sensed that something was wrong. We waited for a long time, but you didn't come back, so Uncle Yen took us back to the Fengdu restaurant. Miss June insisted on waiting for you to come back, so she didn't come with us. Oh no! Nye Tian's face sank when he heard Feng Qi's words. His figure flashed and soared into the sky. Nye Tian, where are you going? Wait for me. Feng Qi was startled. He wanted to find Yen Lingyun, but he was afraid that something might happen to Nye Tian, so he quickly followed. Soon, Nye Tian and Feng Qi arrived at the original place, but they still couldn't see Jun Aoqing's shadow. Miss June has been waiting here all this time. Why is she gone? Feng Qi's face was ugly. He faintly felt that something bad had happened. At this time, he was blaming himself. When Nye Tian left, he entrusted Jun Aoqing to him, but he didn't take good care of her. He originally thought that Nye Tian would come back soon, and with Jun Aoqing's strength, as long as she didn't encounter too strong a martial artist, she would be fine. Unfortunately, something happened to Jun Aoqing. Jun Aoqing! Nye Tian went blank for a moment before he suddenly let out an explosive roar. Like a mad beast, his vigorous roar echoed through the void and spread to a very, very far distance. But the void was silent, there was no echo. Who is it? Who is it? Nye Tian knew that someone must have taken Jun Aoqing away. He was enraged, as if he had gone mad, shouting crazily. Feng Qi watched from the side and couldn't help but panic. Nye Tian, calm down first. Maybe Miss June has something to do and left first. Impossible. Nie Tian's eyes were like fire, and he said in a deep voice, Ouching won't leave until I'm here. Feng Qi frowned, and his expression became even uglier. Nie Tian, wait here first. I'll go find Uncle Yin. With that, his figure moved and left. No matter how optimistic he was, he knew that something must have happened to June Ouching. He could only pray that the person who took June Ouching did not kill her. Otherwise, who knew what Nie Tian would do? Nie Tian stood in the air, his body trembling slightly, unable to calm down for a long time. At this moment, he was like an ant on a hot pan, completely at a loss of what to do. After a moment, Nie Tian suddenly felt an aura appear. He turned around and saw a familiar figure. Sky Demon Sect's young master, Mo Chunyan. Kid, did you lose someone by your side? Mo Chunyan's eyes were poisonous, staring at Nie Tian, and said with a gloomy face. Chapter 2593. Chapter 2593. Chapter 2593. Nie Tian's insidious Mo Chunyan's sudden appearance with a strange look indicated that he was here for Nie Tian. Without a doubt, the ones who captured June Ouching were from the Sky Demon Sect. Mo Xiaogu and Mo Chunyan had always wanted the Blood Wings token. However, the arrival of Huang Fu Zhangxing, Lord Ghost, and Sword Sage Ling Yun completely disrupted their plans. Fortunately, they seized the opportunity when Ao Qing was alone and directly took the latter away. That's right. Mo Chunyan's lips curled into a sinister smile. Young man, your woman was captured by us. If you know what's good for you, hand over the Blood Wings token. He was extremely arrogant as he glared at Nie Tian and threatened him. However, before he could finish his sentence, Nie Tian interrupted him. You're courting death. Nie Tian's eyes were bloodshot as he let out a beast-like roar. His silhouette flickered as the demonic and divine energy in his body erupted. Sword intent gushed out of his body as he slashed down with starry sky slash. Boom! Instantly, an extremely violent sword aura appeared and pressed down on Mo Chunyan like a raging sea. You! The sudden turn of events caught Mo Chunyan off guard. He shrieked and tried to fight back, only to find that the Yuan meridians in his body were being oppressed by the sword aura. Puff! In the next instant, the sword shadow fell and brushed past Mo Chunyan's shoulder, cutting off one of his arms. At the same time, Nie Tian's silhouette arrived and his hand pressed on Mo Chunyan's head. In an instant, if he used a little more force, Mo Chunyan's head would be crushed. No, don't kill me. The sudden turn of events threw Mo Chunyan into a panic. He screamed, his voice turning shrill. He never imagined that Nie Tian would be so crazy as to attack him and take control of him in an instant. It seemed that Nie Tian's strength was stronger than before. Just now, Nie Tian directly used the power of 4 godfiends, so its power was naturally great. If he was willing, Mo Chunyan would already be a corpse. However, he did not kill Mo Chunyan because he still needed to rely on the latter to save Ouching. Where is he? Nie Tian didn't waste any time. He grabbed Mo Chunyan's head with one hand and asked in a cold tone, I'll bring you there, I'll bring you there. Mo Chunyan was so scared that his face turned green, and he hurriedly said. At this moment, 2 silhouettes appeared in the void. They were 2 gray-robed elders and they were very strong. They were both at the peak of the god state. They were all elders of the heavenly demonic sect, and their expressions were extremely ugly at the moment. Originally, they came with Mo Chunyan, but they never showed themselves. Everything that happened just now happened too quickly. They didn't even have time to react. Kid, don't be impulsive, everything can be discussed. One of the elders looked at Nie Tian nervously, beads of sweat oozing from his forehead. Mo Chunyan was the only son of Mo Xiaogu, and he was also the young master of the heavenly demonic sect. If something happened, Mo Xiaogu would definitely kill these 2 elders. Take me to find him. Nie Tianlin coldly roared, and his hand slightly exerted force. Emo Chunyan's head directly overflowed with blood. "Come with us." The other elder was relatively calm and said hurriedly. Then, under the guidance of the two elders, Nye Tian quickly came to a wide wasteland outside the Fengdu ghost city. It's here." The elder's voice trembled as he looked at Nye Tian from afar. Of course, they dared not approach Nye Tian, fearing that Nye Tian would kill Emo Chunyan in a moment of agitation. Nye Tian looked up into the sky and bellowed, "Get the hell out of there! Chunyan!" In the next moment, a scream was heard from the void and a figure appeared. It was the sect leader of the heavenly demonic sect, Emo Xiaogu. At this moment, Emo Xiaogu looked at the scene in front of him with a ferocious expression. The muscles on his face were trembling, and his eyes were filled with violence as he roared, "Get out!" Following his voice, two martial artists appeared, holding a girl with a shackle on her neck. It was Jun Aoqing. Jun Aoqing! Nye Tian's eyes widened when he saw Jun Aoqing. His chest heaved violently, as if a volcano was about to erupt in his heart. "Kid, let go of my son." Emo Xiaogu stared at Nye Tian like a ferocious wolf and said coldly. Suppressing the rage in his heart, Nye Tian said coldly, "Release them together." He could tell that the shackle on Jun Aoqing's neck contained a powerful force that suppressed her vitality meridians. At the same time, it also contained a curse aura. "Fine." Emo Xiaogu let out a roar, and his eyes flickered with a sinister glow. What he was afraid of now was the devil Chunyan in Nye Tian's hands. As long as Nye Tian let go of the devil Chunyan, everything would be fine. Nye Tian and Jun Aoqing were both juniors. No matter how powerful they would not be able to do anything. Most importantly, the shackle that Jun Aoqing was wearing was the heavenly demonic sect's special shackle, the heavenly demonic shackle. Apart from Emo Xiaogu, no one else could open the heavenly demonic shackle. If he used brute force, he would trigger the curse within the heavenly demonic shackle, and Jun Aoqing would be instantly destroyed by the curse. "Kid, I'll count to 3 and we'll let her go." Emo Xiaogu stared at Nye Tian and said in a deep voice. "Okay." Nye Tian nodded. Sword intent surged from his palm and surged into the devil Chunyan's body. The devil Chunyan realized that something was wrong. His mouth was wide open, but he could not make a sound. He did not expect Nye Tian to be so vicious as to leave such a powerful sword intent in his body to kill him. Emo Xiaogu stared at Nye Tian. He was so focused that he did not notice Nye Tian's vicious move. Then, Nye Tian and the devil Chunyan took a step forward. 1, 2, 3. The devil Chunyan's lips trembled, and he finally shouted out 3. Nye Tian moved his palm and pushed the devil Chunyan out. At the same time, the devil Chunyan pushed Jun Aoqing out. "Father, he's going to kill me." The moment the devil Chunyan broke free from the devil Chunyan's control, he screamed. His eyes were filled with fear. The devil Chunyan's eyes trembled. He used his divine sense to sense that something was wrong, and his face fell. "Die." At this moment, Nye Tian's lips curled into a cold smile. He let out a low roar, and his eyes were as vicious as a ferocious beast. Bang! In the next instant, the sword intent in the devil Chunyan's body became violent. Unable to withstand it, his body exploded into a pool of blood. At this moment, a pair of astral soul wings appeared on Nye Tian's back. With a flap of the wings, his body shot out like a ray of light. "Little bastard, you're courting death." In the next moment, something happened, causing Emo Xiaogu's eyes to widen in shock. He let out a loud roar and slammed out with his palm. A terrifying amount of energy gushed out, heading straight for Jun Aoqing. Boom! An incomparably violent palm strike filled with murderous intent slammed down. Chapter 2594. Chapter 2594. Chapter 2594. The coffin of the 7 ultimate swords. Emo Chunyan's tragic death had instantly infuriated the bone demon owl, and he spared no effort in his palm strike, determined to kill June Ouching on the spot. Boom! The monstrous force of the palm surged out like a raging tidal wave, crashing down upon June Ouching. June Ouching could feel the terrible pressure coming at her, her beautiful eyes trembling while her delicate face paled. In that moment of life and death, a figure abruptly arrived. It was Nye Tian, who stood in front of June Ouching. Nye Tian had already known that the Bone Demon Owl would make a move, which was why he had prepared everything the instant he pushed Mo Chunyan out. In the very next instant, a violent force surged out of Nye Tian's body as the Sky of Extreme Yang armor and the Astral Soul shield were activated at the same time. Boom! Then, the horrifying shadow of the palm descended and heavily struck Nye Tian's body, shattering the 2 layers of defense around him. Although Mo Chunyan could not be compared to Huangfu Zhangsheng and the others, he was still a demi-saint, and not someone that Nye Tian could stand against. Bang! The air churned with a terrible violent force, and with a dull thud, Nye Tian's figure was sent flying, drawing a bloody trail in the air. Nye Tian! June Ouching's expression changed at the sight and she cried out in shock. Nye Tian flew hundreds of meters away in the air before finally stabilizing himself. At the moment, Nye Tian's entire body was drenched in blood, as if he had just stepped out of a river of blood. Moreover, the yuan veins in his body were also heavily damaged, and he had completely lost the ability to fight back. It was already a miracle that he could survive a direct blow from a demi-saint. If his martial body was just a little weaker, he would have ended up without a corpse. Not dead. The Bone Demon Owl's eyes changed abruptly as he stared coldly at Nye Tian, his eyes cold to the extreme. He had never imagined that Nye Tian would actually be able to withstand his palm strike. The surrounding elders of the heavenly demonic sect were dumbfounded. Their eyes were wide open and they could not believe what they were seeing. Nye Tian! June Ouching forcefully circulated her yuan meridians. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth as she came to Nye Tian's side nervously. Nye Tian's body swayed slightly, as if he would fall at any moment. His aura was weak, but his eyes still emitted a sharp light. The palm strike from the demon owl bone was indeed terrifying. It directly took away half of Nye Tian's life. Nye Tian forcefully stabilized his body. His brain spun rapidly as he thought about how to leave. With his strength, it was impossible for him to fight against the demon owl bone. He could only stall for time and hope that Feng Qi and Yen Lingyun would arrive sooner. Stinking brat, are you crazy? You almost caused my death. Right at this moment, a sharp voice resounded abruptly in the sky. Immediately afterwards, a cyan-garbed figure appeared in midair. It was slender and as skinny as a twig. Standing in midair, she glared at Nye Tian with a pair of angry eyes. Most peculiar of all was the mustache on his lips, which made him seem very unique. Nye Tian's jaw dropped as he realized that he didn't recognize this person. Although he didn't look very impressive, he radiated a very powerful aura, making him look like a towering mountain peak. You've got guts, you stinking brat. You're only a late paramount god, but you dared to face the palm strike of a sage? I have to hand it to you. Looking at Nye Tian, the man grumbled. Senior, you. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he was just about to speak when he was interrupted by the skinny hemp pole. It doesn't matter that you're dead, the man said in a shrill voice that was neither yin nor yang. I almost died with you. Nye Tian looked very confused, not sure what the man was talking about. He didn't even know this man, so what did his death have to do with him? Who are you, sire? The demon owl bone said, taking a step forward, his energy surging as he glared at the man. You've got a lot of guts, devil owl bone, the man said. I can't believe you dare to cause trouble in Ghost City. Are you tired of living? The man said coldly, turning and taking a step forward to shield Nye Tian and June Ouching. Who exactly are you? The demon owl bone growled, his heart burning with rage. You don't know who I am, do you? The man said with a chuckle. A tremor passed through him, and a heavy black sword appeared on his back. That black heavy sword released a thunderous and violent aura. It floated in the air like a black snake spitting out its tongue. It was extremely dangerous. Nie Tion's eyes narrowed when he saw the heavy black sword on the man's back. The heavy sword was bigger than the man's body, and it could almost fit his entire body inside. From afar, the black heavy sword looked more like a sword coffin. A coffin? Nie Tion's eyes widened, and he exclaimed in his heart, "He's from the Ghoul 13 coffins. Sevenju sword coffin." The demon owl Bone looked at the heavy black sword, and his eyes narrowed. "You're the Sevenju sword king." The Sevenju sword coffin was one of the Ghoul 13 coffins. The Sevenju sword king was the sky coffin master of the Sevenju sword coffin. According to the legends, the Sevenju sword king was a terrifying swordsman. His strength was second only to the king corpse and the ghost king among the Ghoul 13 coffins. The demon owl Bone did not expect the Sevenju sword king to appear here. He was right. The skinny martial artist was the owner of the Sevenju sword coffin, the Sevenju sword king. The Sevenju sword king could not help but laugh when he saw the shock on the demon owl Bone's face. "Looks like my coffin is more famous than mine." The demon owl Bone's eyes widened after confirming the Sevenju sword king's identity. He did not expect the Sevenju sword king to show up at this time. "Lord Sword King, this is a private matter between me and this kid. Please don't interfere." The demon owl Bone calmed himself down and stepped forward, cupped his fists, and said respectfully, "Humph." The Sevenju sword king sneered when he heard the demon owl Bone's words and said, "Do you think I want to interfere in your business? If Lord Ghost King didn't personally order this sword sovereign to protect this kid, this sword sovereign wouldn't care about your business." The Sevenju sword king said angrily, and at the same time, he glared at Nie Tion with hatred. Nie Tion's eyes narrowed, and he finally realized what was going on. The Ghost King had ordered the Sevenju sword king to secretly protect him. The Ghost King would not want anything bad to happen to Nie Tion, as he was going to open the gate of the sacred world for the Ghost King. "Brat," Lord Ghost King said, "that if you die during this time, I'll be buried with you. So behave yourself and don't keep offending these shameless people." Sword Sovereign 7 Absolute suddenly looked at Nie Tion and said with a serious expression. Nie Tion was speechless. He really did not offend the Demon Owl Bones group, but the Demon Owl Bones group came to him. "Lord Sword King, are you really going to protect this kid?" The Demon Owl Bone looked at the Sevenju sword king coldly and asked, "Lord Sword King, are you really going to protect this kid?" "Demon Owl Bone, it's not that I want to protect him, but I have to. You heard it just now. If he dies, I won't be able to live either." The mustache on the Sevenju sword king's lips trembled, and he spread out his hands helplessly. "Lord Sword King, if that's the case, I have no choice but to offend you." The Demon Owl Bone's face was gloomy, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. In an instant, his aura surged violently in the air. Chapter 2595. Chapter 2595. Chapter 2595. The secret of the heavenly demon sect. His son had died a horrible death, and the murderer was right in front of him. How could Mo Xiao Gu let this go? His aura surged violently, releasing an incomparably sharp aura, like a raging sea, surging violently. What's there to offend? Chijua Sword Master smiled in the face of Bone Demon's monstrous aura and said, "Since Sect Master Demon wants to fight, then I'll fight with you. I would like to see how strong the sect leaders of the 7 major sects are." As soon as he finished speaking, the sword coffin of 7 absolutes behind him suddenly moved. A majestic and mighty sword momentum rose violently like a stormy sea, raging in the void. Sensing Chijua Swordsman's sword aura, Mo Xiao Gu's eyes were filled with unconcealable fear. He did not expect Chijua Swordsman to be this strong. At this moment, Nie Tion's eyes also flickered with astonishment. Judging from the sword aura, Chijua swordsman's sword will was terrifying. Even if it was not as strong as Yenlingyun, it was at least on par with Mu Honglu. The Seven-Ju sword coffin is my coffin, my primordial spirit and my sword. Chijua sword master sneered and said, Demon Owl Bone, you'd better take my first strike. Kaboom! The Seven-Ju sword coffin behind Chijua swordsman moved and a sword will shot out like a thunderclap. It was extremely sharp and went straight for Mo Xiaogu. A bone saber appeared in Mo Xiaogu's hand. It was his primordial spirit saber, the demonic bone saber. Boom! The demon owl bone blade slashed down with a domineering and tyrannical force. It had the power of 10,000 caddies and was extremely terrifying. Seeing this, Nye Tian couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Fortunately, when the demon owl bone attacked just now, he did not use the demon owl bone blade. Otherwise, he would have died even if he had 10 lives. Up in the sky, the saber radiance and sword shadows bloomed. Violent saber essences and sword essences surged and spread across the void with a terrifying force. Nye Tian endured the pain in his body and quickly retreated to avoid the impact of the saber and sword wave. Boom! In the next moment, the huge blade shadow and the sword shadow collided, producing a loud explosion. Immediately, a terrifying shock wave spread out, causing the surrounding space to shake violently as if it was about to collapse. Boom! Bang bang bang! The ground was battered by the violent waves and cracked open thousands of meters, forming a terrifying ravine. At the same time, high up in the sky, 2 figures suddenly retreated, and then immediately attacked at the same time. Rumble! Terrible roars could be heard in the sky. The space was completely filled with saber lights and sword shadows. Chijua Sword King and Demon Owl Bone could no longer be seen. Nye Tian watched from afar, his eyes filled with horror. He did not expect the strength of the Demon Owl Bone to be so terrifying. After a while, the turbid waves in the sky gradually weakened, and the figures of Sword Sage Chijua and Demon Owl Bone could be vaguely seen. Sword Emperor Chijua had gained the absolute advantage. Sword after sword, he was completely suppressing Mo Xiaogu. Nye Tian could tell that Sword Saint Chijua did not want to kill Demon Owl Bone. Otherwise, Demon Owl Bone would not have survived until now. Boom! At this time, Sword Saint Chijua slashed down with his sword. The terrifying sword shadow was like a mountain, forcing Demon Owl Bone to retreat thousands of meters. Demon Owl Bone steadied himself. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his face was as pale as paper. He looked at Sword Saint Chijua with fear. Sword Saint Chijua's strength was indeed terrifying. No wonder he was the one in the 13 heavenly coffins, second only to the Zombie King and the Ghost King. If the battle continued, Demon Owl Bone would definitely suffer a great loss. Demon Owl Bone, do you still want to fight? Sword Master Chijua no longer attacked. His mustache twitched as he said proudly, Sword Saint Chijua, why do you insist on protecting this kid? Demon Owl Bone's eyes were dark and cold. Sword Sovereign Chijua shook his head speechlessly and said, Didn't I tell you already? Lord Ghost King has tied me and this kid together. I have no choice but to protect him. But what if he kills Bloodwing Ancestor? Demon Owl Bone's eyes flashed coldly as he pointed at Nye Tian and said, What? Upon hearing the Demon Bone Voodoo's words, Swordmaster 7-Ju let out an exclamation before turning to Nye Tian. His beady eyes went wide as he exclaimed, You killed Patriarch Bloodwing? Nye Tian frowned. He didn't want to hide it and nodded. Good. Very good. Unexpectedly, Sword Master Chijua actually cried out in excitement. He was very happy and said, Kid, I didn't save you for nothing. You actually killed that old bastard Shui. Nye Tian was stunned by Sword Saint Chijua's reaction and couldn't react for a long time. He thought that Sword Saint Chijua would be furious after knowing that he killed Bloodwing Ancestor. Sword Saint Chijue's reaction was the opposite of what he expected. It was as if Blood Wing Ancestor was an enemy instead of a companion. You! Demon Owl Bone was also stunned. His mouth was wide open, but he couldn't say a word. He didn't expect Sword Saint Chijue to have such a reaction after knowing that Blood Wing Ancestor was killed. Cough, cough, cough. After a long time, Sword Saint Chijue had laughed enough and coughed awkwardly. He looked at Demon Owl Bone and said, "Demon Owl Bone, I forgot to tell you that Blood Wing Ancestor and I are sworn enemies. The fact that Nye Tian killed that old bastard Bloodwing was exactly what I wanted." Demon Owl Bone's face froze. He wanted to cry but had no tears. Nye Tian was also stunned and couldn't speak for a long time. Ah! Sword Saint Chijue suddenly thought of something and let out a strange cry. His eyes lit up as he looked at Demon Owl Bone and said, "Demon Owl Bone, if I remember correctly, Blood Wing Ancestor used to be the deputy sect master of Heavenly Demon Sect." Hearing Sword Master Chijue's words, Mo Xiao Gu's eyes darkened and his face darkened. "Ha ha!" Sword Saint Chijue suddenly laughed and said, "As far as I know, Blood Wing Ancestor was the junior brother of the previous sect master of Heavenly Demon Sect. You, Demon Owl Bone, were the disciple of the previous sect master. Does this mean that Ancestor Bloodwing is your martial uncle?" "So what?" Demon Owl Bone shouted in a cold voice. He was obviously excited. "If that's the case, then I know why you're looking for trouble with Nye Tian." Sword Saint Chijue chuckled and looked at Nye Tian. "Nye Tian, did you take a token from Blood Wing Ancestor?" "Yes." Nye Tian frowned and nodded. He did obtain a token after Ancestor Bloodwing's death. It was the Bloodwing token. However, the Bloodwing token was not with him. It was with Feng Qi. He didn't expect Ancestor Bloodwing to be Demon Owl Bone's martial uncle. "That's right. Everything is clear now." Sword Saint Chijue smiled and said, "When Bloodwing Ancestor left Heavenly Demon Sect, he stole half of the Heavenly Demon 9 Limits technique. He hid half of the Heavenly Demon 9 Limits technique in the Bloodwing token." Sword Saint Chijue looked at Demon Owl Bone and asked with a strange smile, "Demon Owl Bone, am I right?" Demon Owl Bone's face darkened. His eyes flickered but he didn't speak. He didn't expect Sword Saint Chijue to know so much. Chapter 2596. Chapter 2596. Chapter 2596 LL Wait 7ju Swordsman smirked and said, "Demon Bone, judging from your expression, I'm right. Lord Swordsman, I can spare this kid's life, but he has to hand over the Bloodwing token." Demon Bone suddenly raised his head and said with a vicious expression, "Sure, a gentleman helps others achieve their dreams." Stroking his mustache, Sword Master 7ju turned to Nye Tian and said, "Nye Tian, you heard what I said just now. You'd better give the Bloodwing Command Medallion to Demon Owl Bone, so that he won't keep bothering you." Nye Tian furrowed his brows, and his expression turned a little ugly. He now knew that there was nothing special about the Bloodwing token. It was just important to the Heavenly Demonic Sect. The Bloodwing token was useless to him, and it would be a disaster if he kept it with him. The awkward thing was that he did not have the Bloodwing token with him. "Kid, you don't want to hand over the token?" Demon Bone's face darkened when he saw that Nye Tian had no intention of handing over the Bloodwing token. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. He had given up on avenging his son, which was the biggest concession he could make. How could he tolerate Nye Tian's refusal to hand over the Bloodwing token? "Demon Bone, I can give you the Bloodwing token, but you have to unlock the shackles on June Ouching first," Nye Tian said after a moment of thought. He had already noticed that the shackles on June Ouching were very strange and difficult to unlock. It would be a good idea to let Demon Bone unlock June Ouching's shackles in exchange for the Bloodwing token. "Alright, it's a deal." Demon Bone frowned and nodded after a long moment of thought. Due to 7ju Swordsman's appearance, He was in a disadvantageous position. His current goal was not to kill Nye Tian but to retrieve the Bloodwing token. Ask that little girl to come here. Demon Bone looked at Nye Tian and said in a deep voice. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, clearly a little worried. If the Devil Owl Bone suddenly attacked Jun Aoqing, it would be troublesome. Nye Tian, don't worry. Sect Leader Mo is a smart person and won't do anything stupid. With a faint smile, he said, Sect Master Devil cherishes his own life very much. He wouldn't be so stupid as to trade his life for someone who doesn't matter to him. Nye Tian's expression flickered. You're right. Ao Qing, you go. Nye Tian finally nodded and said lightly. Sword Master Qijue's words were clear. If Mo Xiaogu dared to hurt Jun Aoqing, he would kill him. To the Demon Owl Bone, Jun Aoqing's life was nothing. He was not stupid enough to anger Sword King Qijue for Jun Aoqing. Jun Aoqing walked to the Demon Owl Bone's side. A moment later, the heavenly devil shackles on her body were unlocked. After getting rid of the heavenly devil shackles, she moved and returned to Nye Tian's side. Kid, I have unlocked the heavenly devil shackles for your woman. Now give me the Bloodwings token. Demon Bone suddenly raised his head and looked coldly at Nye Tian. At this time, Nye Tian had recovered a little bit. He scanned Jun Aoqing with his divine sense, and after confirming that the latter was fine, he let out a sigh of relief. He looked at Demon Bone and said, The Bloodwings token is not with me. It's with my friend. Wait for me here. I'll go get the token. Seeing that Nye Tian was about to leave, Demon Bone roared and stepped forward, ready to attack. Brat, you tricked me! Hey! Don't be impulsive. On the other side, Qijue's Sword Saint stepped forward and stared at Mo Xiaogu with a pair of eagle-like eyes. He smirked and said, Mo Xiaogu, you can be considered an old monster who has lived for decades. I didn't expect you to fail so miserably in a simple task. In this world, there is no such thing as honesty, especially when it comes to the enemy. There is no need to keep promises. You, puff. Demon Bone was furious. Coupled with the fact that he was severely injured by Sword King Qijue, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Standing off to the side, Nye Tian came to a stop and frowned deeply. He did not intend to break his promise, but the Bloodwings token was not with him. Let's go, Nye Tian. With these words, Swordmaster 7 Ultimate laughed heartily as he blurred into motion, preparing to swagger off. Nye Tian, however, didn't show any intention of leaving right away. Instead, he looked at Devil Owl Bone and said, Devil Owl Bone, the Bloodwings command medallion is indeed not with me. Our deal still stands. If you're willing to wait, I'll bring it to you. Sword King Qijue was stunned when he heard Nye Tian's words. His expression was clearly saying, Are you stupid? At this moment, Nye Tian could have just swaggered off, yet he had spoken in such a solemn manner, which was very puzzling. His actions were indeed stupid in the eyes of many. Even though Nye Tian's words sounded sincere, the Bone Demon didn't believe him. Eyes bloodshot, he roared, Brat, I won't let you get away with this for playing tricks on me. Sect Master Mo, Nye Tian isn't messing with you. At that moment, a voice suddenly echoed out. Two figures appeared. They were Yan Lingyun and Feng Qi. The one who had just spoken was none other than Feng Qi. He steadied himself, looked at Mo Xiaogu, and said, Sect Master Mo, the Bloodwings command medallion is indeed not in Nye Tian's hands. As he spoke, he flipped his palm and a token appeared in his palm. It was the Bloodwings token. The Bloodwings token. Demon Bone's eyes lit up when he saw the Bloodwings token. Nye Tian. Feng Qi smiled and threw the Bloodwings token to Nye Tian. He said, You got the Bloodwings token. You decide if you want to give it to Sect Leader Demon. Nye Tian took the token with a gloomy expression. Mo Xiaogu's eyes were trembling and his old face was extremely embarrassed. Feng Qi was not the only one who had arrived. Yan Lingyun was there as well. If Yan Lingyun were to attack him, he could kill him in a second. Therefore, he felt that he might not be able to leave this place alive, let alone get the Bloodwing's token. At that moment, Nye Tian raised his hand and tossed the Bloodwing command token to him. Demon Owlbone, here's your Bloodwing command token. Mo Xiao Gu reached out his hand and took the badge. He was dumbfounded and could not believe his eyes. Nye Tian could have refused to give him the token. However, Nye Tian's action was unusual. He had given the token to him. Why was that? Demon Bone, I told you that our deal is still valid. I'm giving you the Bloodwing's token to fulfill my promise. At this moment, Nye Tian fixed the Devil Owlbone with a grim look and said coldly, "But this won't end here. You almost killed my woman. I will definitely make you pay for this." With these words, fierce killing intent burst forth from Nye Tian's eyes. Demon Bone had taken Jun Ouching away, which posed a great threat to her safety. This was a huge debt to Nye Tian. Even if Nye Tian killed Mo Chunian, it would not be enough to appease his hatred. One day, he would personally find the Demon Owlbone and kill him with his own hands. Demon Bone was stunned for a moment before he came back to his senses. He kept the Bloodwing's token and said cold, "I'll be waiting for you." He did not dare to stay any longer and left with the people of Sky Demon Sect. Nye Tian wanted to kill him, and he wanted to kill Nye Tian too. The hatred of his son was absolutely irreconcilable. He was Demon Bone's son, and he would not let his son die in vain. However, now was not the time to attack Nye Tian. Moreover, he had obtained the Sky Demon 9 limit skill. As long as he focused on cultivating it, he would be able to reach the peak of the Frozen Ruins. Chapter 2597. Chapter 2597. Chapter 2597. Not a step away. Demon Owlbone's group quickly left. Nye Tian stared in the direction where Demon Owlbone's group disappeared. It took a while for his gloomy expression to ease up. "Kid, you're interesting." Chijua Swordsman looked at Nye Tian, his mustache twitching as he chuckled. Yenlingyun looked at the look in Nye Tian's eyes and was surprised in her heart. She said, "Although this kid's strength is not strong, his talent and willpower are both excellent. In time, he will definitely become a peak figure." "Uncle Yen, what do you think? Isn't the thigh I'm hugging?" Feng Qi was beside Yenlingyun and smirked when he saw the latter's surprise. Yenlingyun's lips twitched as he thought to himself, "Feng Qi, with your talent and identity, you're already a thigh. Why do you need to hug someone else's thigh? Let's go." Nye Tian nodded and prepared to leave. "Nye Tian, who's this guy?" Feng Qi walked over and glanced at Chijua Swordsman with a frown. "I'm Nye Tian's personal bodyguard." Chijua Swordsman chuckled and added, "For now." Yenlingyun laughed and said, "Since when did Chijua Swordsman of the Ghoul Corpse's 13 heavenly coffins become a bodyguard?" "Yenlingyun, I will do whatever I want to do. What can you do about it?" Sword Master Chijua glanced at Yenlingyun and said in an annoyed tone. Yenlingyun smiled and said, "I'm afraid you're under the Ghost King's orders." Chijua Swordsman rolled his eyes and said, "Since you know, why are you still talking nonsense?" After the Ghost King took Nye Tian away, Chijua Swordsman had become Nye Tian's bodyguard. It wasn't hard to guess what had happened. However, Yenlingyun was very curious as to why the Ghost King cared so much about Nye Tian. Could it be that he had some special relationship with Nye Tian? Then, Nye Tian's group didn't stay any longer and immediately left, quickly returning to the plentiful Metropolis restaurant. After returning to the restaurant, Nye Tian wanted to be with Jun Ouching, but Sword God Chijua followed closely behind him. "Lord Sword King, even if you want to protect me, you don't have to follow me everywhere, do you?" Nye Tian looked at Sword King Chijua speechlessly. "Did I disturb your married life?" Chijua Sword Sovereign twirled his mustache, and said with a chuckle, "This Sword Sovereign likes to ruin other people's business. Didn't you say that a gentleman should help others achieve their goals?" Nye Tian was speechless. He just wanted to be alone with Jun Ouching for a while. He didn't think of anything else. That was then and this is now. Sword God Chijua said with a chuckle, Lord Ghost King ordered me to stay close to you, so I have no choice. Nietion's eyebrows furrowed as he realized what was going on. The Ghost King was worried that Nietion would tell others about the gate of the Holy World. The Ghost King's thoughts were a little vile. The gate of the Holy World was a deal between him and Nietion. Nietion wouldn't tell others so easily. Now that Sword God Chijua was following him, he felt very helpless. After walking out of Jun Aoqing's room, Nietion prepared to enter his own room to recover from his injuries. However, Sword God Chijua followed him closely and actually wanted to enter his room. Lord Sword King, I'm the only one in the room. There's no need for you to follow me, right? Nietion said with a frown. It's fine. Just cultivate, I'll just watch from the side. Sword God Chijua simply pushed the door open and entered the room, chuckling. Don't worry, I'm straight and won't have any improper thoughts about you. Nietion was speechless, his facial features all dark. Sword God Chijua's devotion to duty left Nietion helpless, and he could only let him be. After entering his room, Nietion sat cross-legged and entered a state of cultivation. 3 days later, he opened his eyes. Most of the injuries on his body had healed. Seeing that Nietion had woken up, Swordmaster Seven Jew's eyes shone with a strange light as he chuckled and said, Boy, you're really something. Even a half-saint expert wouldn't be able to recover from such serious injuries so quickly. He had stayed by Nietion's side over the last 3 days, witnessing with his own eyes that Nietion had mostly recovered from his grievous injuries. It was a miraculous process. After all, Nietion had taken a palm strike from a demi-saint and was half dead. In just 3 days, he had mostly recovered, and such speed of recovery was nothing short of monstrous. You flatter me, Sword God Chijua. Nietion smiled faintly, his face calm. Nietion, I finally understand why the Ghost King values you so much. Sword God Chijua chuckled. I'm guessing that the Ghost King wants you to be the next Ghost King, right? Nietion's face darkened and he could not say a word. Sword God Chijua had a rich imagination, making wild guesses all day long. Could it be that you refused the Ghost King's offer to take you in as a disciple? Sword God Chijua asked again when he saw that Nietion was not saying anything. Sword God Chijua, I've only made a deal with the Ghost King, and there's nothing else. Nietion explained with a serious face, feeling truly helpless. Deal? What kind of deal? Sword God Chijua's eyes quivered. His face filled with excitement as he instantly became a curious baby. Sword God Chijua, the Ghost King does not wish for a third party to know about this deal. Nietion smiled faintly and looked at Sword God Chijua weirdly. Are you sure you want me to say it? Sword God Chijua's face stiffened and he laughed dryly. If the Ghost King does not wish for others to know, then don't say it. Don't say it. Nietion's lips curled into a smile and he said nothing else. Then, he prepared to visit Jun Aoqing and the others. But that was when 2 figures appeared outside the door. Brother Nie, are you there? Huang Fu Hong's voice rang, very respectful. Come in, Huang Fu Hong. Nietion frowned. He saw that Huang Fu Zhangxing was standing beside Huang Fu Hong, and he did not know what was going on between the aunt and niece. Huang Fu Zhangxing and Huang Fu Hong pushed the door open and entered, then closed the door. Brother Nie, my aunt has almost recovered. She specially came to thank you for saving her life. Huang Fu Hong was very enthusiastic. He stepped forward and came to Nietion's side, saying excitedly, Tower Master is too polite. Nietion smiled faintly and looked up at Huang Fu Zhangxing, only to find that the latter's eyes were strange. Boom! In the next moment, Huang Fu Zhangxing suddenly stepped forward and released a terrifying cold force from his body. It suddenly descended and fell directly on Nietion's body. The sudden attack caught Nietion off guard. He did not have time to make any resistance, and his whole body instantly turned into a man of ice. In fact, with his strength, even if he knew that Huangfu Zhangxing was going to make a move, it would be useless. "Aunt, what are you doing?" Huangfu Hong was suddenly stunned and shouted in shock. His eyes were wide open, and he could not believe the scene in front of him. Huangfu Zhangxing said that he specially came to thank Nie Tian. Why did he suddenly attack Nie Tian after entering the room? "Crazy woman, you're courting death." At the same time, Chijua Sword Saint reacted and growled. His body shook, and an extremely fierce sword intent attacked Huangfu Zhangxing. However, Huangfu Zhangxing was not in a hurry, as if he had already expected it. The coldness in his body intensified, and suddenly the cold air was released, freezing the sword intent. In the next moment, before Chijua Sword Saint could attack again, Huangfu Zhangxing growled and said in the next moment, "Chijua Sword Saint, if you don't want him to die, you'd better behave." Chapter 2598. A powerful figure. The room was cold and suffocating, and the atmosphere was oppressive. Huangfu Zhangxing, who had come to express his gratitude, suddenly attacked, catching Nie Tian and Sevenju Swordmaster off guard. Sevenju Swordmaster was afraid of Nie Tian's safety, so he didn't dare to attack. He could only stare at Huangfu Zhangxing, afraid that the latter would kill Nie Tian on impulse. "Auntie, stop! What are you doing? Nie Tian saved your life. Why are you hurting him?" Huangfu Hong came to his senses and shouted. He was so anxious that beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. At this moment, the cold around Huangfu Zhangxing weakened slightly, and the cold on Nie Tian's head dissipated. He could speak, but his limbs were still frozen. "Tower Lord, what's the meaning of this?" Nie Tian asked coldly, looking at Huangfu Zhangxing. He could sense that Huangfu Zhangxing had no intention of killing him. Otherwise, he would have been a corpse by now. "Nie Tian, let me ask you a few questions. As long as you answer me truthfully, I won't hurt you," Huangfu Zhangxing said in a deep voice, his eyes cold. Nie Tian nodded and waited for Huangfu Zhangxing's question. He couldn't figure out why Huangfu Zhangxing had to ask in such a way. "Nie Tian, what's the relationship between you and the Ghost King?" Huangfu Zhangxing asked his first question in a cold voice. "It doesn't matter," Nie Tian answered with a calm expression. Huangfu Zhangxing was stunned, but she couldn't see any panic in Nie Tian's eyes. She continued, "If there's nothing between us, why did the Ghost King save me? And why did he give you the spirit heart of all trees?" Nie Tian frowned and said, "Because the Ghost King has a favor to ask of me." Huangfu Zhangxing chuckled disdainfully. Why would a powerful Ghost King need a late paramount god's help? Nie Tian felt Huangfu Zhangxing's contempt and was instantly slightly displeased, and he said coldly, "Tower Master, I'm speaking the truth. It's up to you whether you believe it or not." Huangfu Qingxing's face sank again as he stared at Nie Tian with a burning gaze, trying to find a trace of falsehood in the latter's eyes. But to her disappointment, Nie Tian was very calm, without the slightest bit of panic, and without the slightest bit of falsehood. Everything that Nie Tian said was true. The Ghost King was indeed the one who begged him about the gate of the sacred realm. "Auntie, Nie Tian is telling the truth. Quickly let him go." At this time, Huangfu Hong cried out again in panic. Huangfu Zhangxing ignored him and stared at Nie Tian, saying, "One last question. Why is there an aura in your body that is so similar to the power of the Ghost King?" Nie Tian frowned, a bit surprised. He didn't expect Huangfu Zhangxing to be able to sense that the aura of his god-devil nascent embryo was somewhat similar to the extreme devil power. In the next moment, Nie Tian calmed down and said, "Tower Master, I can't answer your question, because I don't know why either." Huangfu Zhangxing's pretty face sank again, and her eyes were as cold as ice as she stared at Nie Tian. Nie Tian didn't evade, and just stared straight at Huangfu Zhangxing. After a dozen or so seconds, Huangfu Zhangxing's expression finally relaxed, and the cold aura around her disappeared. Nie Tian recovered and let out a long breath of impure air. Huangfu Zhangxing was too overbearing, even the way he asked people was so domineering. No wonder she wasn't married at such an old age. Seeing that Huangfu Zhangxing finally let go of Nie Tian, Huangfu Hong hurriedly took a step forward and asked nervously, "Brother Nie, are you all right?" "I'm fine." Nie Tian smiled faintly and calmly looked at Huangfu Zhangxing, saying, "Tower Master was just joking with me, that's all." Huangfu Zhangxing knew that Nie Tian was giving him a way out, but he didn't avoid it and directly said, "Hong is pure and kind by nature, and he's not shrewd. I don't want him to be used by others. I was rash just now, please don't take it to heart." "Tower Master is too serious." Nie Tian faintly smiled and said, "Tower Master didn't have the intention to hurt me, otherwise I wouldn't be standing here unscathed. You're very good at talking." Huangfu Zhangxing spoke bluntly, and then slightly bowed and solemnly said, "Thank you for saving my life. I, Huangfu Zhangxing, don't owe anyone. I'll return this favor to you." "Tower Master is too polite, you've already returned this favor." Nie Tian found it really tiring to talk to Huangfu Zhangxing, but he still smiled and said, "I haven't thanked Tower Master for saving a girl from the hands of the patriarch of thousands of babies. There's no need to thank me." Huangfu Zhangxing said indifferently, "I killed the patriarch of thousands of babies because he deserved to be killed, not to save someone, and not for you to thank me." Nie Tian looked embarrassed, and he really couldn't talk to Huangfu Zhangxing anymore. "You crazy woman, you're simply a lunatic." At this moment, Chijua Swordsman finally couldn't bear it anymore and said, "Do you know that you almost killed me just now? It's good that you're dead." Huangfu Zhangxing suddenly turned around and looked at Chijua Swordsman cold, and said word by word, "All of you from the Ghost Corp's 13 coffins deserve to die." Chijua Swordsman's face froze when he felt the coldness from Huangfu Zhangxing's body, and he didn't dare to speak for a while. "Hong I haven't fully recovered from my injuries. I'll take my leave first." Huangfu Zhangxing then ignored Chijua Swordsman, and said to Huangfu Hong before turning around and leaving. Huangfu Hong watched Huangfu Zhangxing leave, then he let out a long sigh of relief and hurriedly apologized to Nie Tian. "Brother Nie, I'm really sorry. My aunt is actually a good person, but she's a bit too domineering." "It's fine." Nie Tian waved his hand and smiled bitterly. It must be hard for Huangfu Hong to have such a domineering aunt. "This woman is strong and spicy, and I like her. If I marry her, my life in the future will definitely be colorful. Just thinking about it makes me excited." At this moment, Chijua Swordsman looked in the direction where Huangfu Zhangxing left and said with a pair of squinting eyes that emitted a blazing light, as if he was infatuated with her. Nie Tian looked at Chijua Swordsman speechlessly. Previously, Chijua Swordsman said that his sexual orientation was normal. Now that he thought about it, it was indeed normal. It was just that the general direction was right, but the minor directions seemed to be a little different from ordinary people. "Bastard, what did you say?" Huangfu Hong looked at Chijua Swordsman and roared angrily. "Young man, why are you so angry? Be polite to your future uncle's father-in-law." Chijua Swordsman chuckled and said shamelessly, "You." Huangfu Hong was so angry that his face turned red. If he was strong enough, he could not wait to kill Chijua Swordsman. "Forget it, don't lower yourself to his level." Nie Tian quickly stopped Huangfu Hong and advised. Chijua Swordsman chuckled and was about to say something. Bang! However, at this moment, a violent muffled sound came from outside, as if two powerful auras had collided. Chijua Swordsman's eyes narrowed when he sensed the surging sword essence in the void. His expression changed, and he exclaimed, "There's a big shot." After saying that, his figure moved and directly rushed out. Nie Tian was speechless. Didn't he say that he would stay by her side and protect her? Then, Nie Tian and Huangfu Hong also rushed out. The two of them followed Chijua swordsman out of the restaurant and leaped into the air. At this moment, in the sky, two figures stood there like two giant swords, facing off against each other. Lord Sword Sage. Nie Tian looked at one of the figures and immediately recognized that it was Soaring Cloud Sword Sage, Yen Lingyun. The other figure in black was also a peerless swordsman. The sword essence around him was no weaker than Yen Lingyun's. Selfless swordsman. Chijua swordsman looked at the black-robed swordsman and said in shock. The black-robed swordsman was a swordsman who was as famous as Soaring Cloud Sword Sage, Selfless Swordsman. Chapter 2599. Chapter 2599. Chapter 2599 Victory or Defeat in one stroke. There were two pinnacle swordsmen in Frozen Relic, Sword Sage Soaring Cloud and Selfless Swordmaster. These two swordsmen were recognized as the pinnacle of the sword world in Frozen Relic. Even swordsmen like Mu Honglu and Chijua swordsmen were slightly inferior to these two. And now, the two strongest swordsmen in Frozen Relic were facing off against each other. Nie Tian looked at Sword Sage Soaring Cloud and Selfless Swordmaster, and felt two terrifying sword auras clashing in the void. The entire area was shrouded in terrifying sword essence. These two were indeed the pinnacle of the sword world. The strength of their sword essences was incredible. Even though the two of them were standing in the void hundreds of thousands of meters above the ground, the powerful sword essences were still on the verge of exploding. The pressure was suffocating. These two guys have met. There's going to be a good show. Hee, Chijua swordsman, who was next to Nie Tian, twirled his mustache and gloated. A battle between two pinnacle swordsmen was a rare sight. Is there any animosity between the two of them? Is this going to be a life-and-death battle? Nie Tian frowned and looked worried. Is there a need for animosity in a battle between experts? Chijua swordsman laughed and said, since these two are both pinnacle swordsmen, of course they have to fight. A king doesn't meet another king. Just then, Feng Qi appeared and shook his head with a bitter smile. When two people in the same position meet, there will definitely be a battle. Nie Tian frowned even more and his eyes lit up. He was looking forward to the next battle. Qin Shohan, I haven't seen you for so many years. You haven't improved at all. In the sky, Yen Lingyun's voice was heard as he shouted Selfless Swordmaster's name. There was a hint of provocation in his tone. Yen Lingyun, aren't you still the same? You haven't made any breakthrough in hundreds of years. Qin Shohan's face was cold as he spoke. Sword essence surged from his body as though it was going to tear the surrounding void apart. Even if I haven't made a breakthrough, it's enough to defeat you. Yen Lingyun sneered and his eyes were filled with disdain. Nie Tian furrowed his brows and understood a little. Judging from their conversation, it was clear that they were old rivals, neither willing to concede defeat to the other. This battle was clearly just a spar and not a life-and-death battle. Yen Lingyun, cut the crap. Qin Shohan's face sank slightly, and she said in a loud voice, this is Fengdu Ghost City, not a place for us to fight. Today we will decide the winner with a single sword strike. Let everyone see who is the #1 swordsman in the frozen ruins. Sure. Would I, Yen Lingyun, be afraid of you? Cold laughter rang out from Yen Lingyun's mouth. After which, his entire body's aura surged as he leapt up, arriving even higher up in the sky. Qin Shohan's figure similarly moved, and she stepped into the sky, forcefully standing opposite Yen Lingyun. Boom! Boom! In the next moment, the two of them released an extremely violent sword will, which suddenly rose up and released crazily in the void. It surged fiercely like two giant swords that could split the sky and the earth in the next moment. The sword will of these two is so strong. Nie Tian stood close to 100,000 meters away, but he could still feel the enormous sword will descending from the sky. His gaze couldn't help but tremble, and his heart was filled with shock. Chijua swordsman's expression was a little ugly at this moment. His face was dark, and he didn't speak, as if he was thinking about something. Although his reputation wasn't as great as Yan Lingyun and Qin Shohan, as a swordsman, of course he had the heart to compete. In the past, he felt that even if he wasn't as strong as Yan Lingyun and Qin Shohan, he was only slightly weaker. But at this moment, he personally felt the sword will of the two of them. Only then did he understand that the gap between him and the two of them was extremely large. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if it was a true life and death battle, Qijua swordsman would very likely be killed by a swordsman like Yan Lingyun and Qin Shohan in one move. The gap between swordsmanship was originally very large. Especially at the later stages, it was definitely a world of difference. The crowd below felt the enormous sword will descending from the sky. Similarly, their eyes were filled with shock, and their expressions were lifeless. Yan Lingyun and Qin Shohan were really very terrifying. That kind of surging sword will cause people to tremble. Make your move, Qin Shohan. At this moment, Yan Lingyun's voice sounded from the sky. It was like a great bell, endlessly resounding. All right. One sword to determine the victor. Qin Shohan coldly replied. Her voice was as sharp as killing intent. When it entered the ears of the crowd, it was as if it could directly pierce through their eardrums. Boom! Boom! In the next instant the two figures moved at the same time. The sky rumbled twice, and then two shocking sword shadows appeared. Like two ancient beasts, they crazily galloped towards each other. Buzz! At this moment, a strange buzzing sound came from the sky. It was actually affected by the pressure of the sword will, and it let out a groan. The crowd below stared with their eyes wide open. They didn't even dare to blink. Their hearts were in their throats, and their nerves were extremely tense. To be able to witness a battle between the peak of the sword world was definitely a kind of glory. Bang! In the next instant, under the gaze of countless people, the two boundless sword shadows finally collided. In the sky, an earth-shattering roar was heard. Then, an endless amount of wild waves surged over. Buzz! The intense collision of the extreme forces formed a visible wave in the sky. From the center of the collision, like a huge ripple, it spread in all directions. In an instant, the crowd felt their chests tighten, as if they had been punched hard by someone. Some of the weaker cultivators directly vomited blood. Their figures retreated rapidly, and some even fell from the sky. Nie Tian also felt the terrifying force approaching him. Although he tried his best to resist, he was still forced to retreat a few hundred meters. Although Sword Saint Qijue was like a mountain, he didn't move at all. However, his expression was extremely shocked, and his entire person was lifeless. The sword intent attack that came from all directions allowed him to clearly understand just how great the gap between him and Yan Lingyun and Qin Shohan was. Boom! 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 Chi-chi-chi. Violent waves of air collided in the sky, roaring like a thunderstorm. Ear-piercing sounds continuously rang out in the sky. The world and the sky fell into chaos, as if the world was about to be destroyed. Luckily, Yan Lingyun and Qin Shohan were at a sufficiently high position. If they were slightly closer to the ground, the entire ghost city of Plentiful City would likely be reduced to ruins. After a long time, the wild waves in the sky receded, and two figures slowly became clear. Yan Lingyun and Qin Shohan's figures froze in the sky. Their expressions were as gloomy as water, and there were traces of blood at the corners of their mouths. Their gazes were cold as they looked at each other, but they didn't speak. In this clash of swords, the two of them were actually evenly matched. Nie Tian looked at the two of them, and he sucked in a breath of cold air in his heart. It had to be said that these two people were too ruthless. Although it looked like they were only won by one sword, in reality, it was more or less a battle of life and death. In this sword, both of them used their full strength. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to both be injured. Luckily, the two of them were extremely close in strength, so it was a situation where both were injured. If one of them was slightly weaker, it would likely be an outcome where not even a corpse remained. If these two people were in a battle of life and death, the odds of victory and defeat would be evenly matched. The most likely outcome would be one side winning a Pyrrhic victory, and the other losing. In a battle of life and death, many times, what determined the outcome was not strength, but condition. Especially under the situation where the strength was similar, the side in better condition would undoubtedly have the advantage. Chapter 2600. The first swordsman. After a long moment, the two sword-like figures made their move. "Yen Lingyun," Qin Shuhan said, "you really are worthy of being my opponent. You didn't disappoint me." Qin Shuhan was the first to speak. His eyes were cold, but at the same time, they contained a trace of respect. "Qin Shuhan, you're also very strong. If you weren't here in this world, I'd probably feel very lonely." Yen Lingyun's mouth twitched as he responded with a faint smile. He and Qin Shuhan were saints among swords, while the other was a devil among swords. Although the two of them had completely different natures and positions, and were even enemies, they understood each other the best. Sometimes, the communication between sword wills was more effective than ordinary communication, and could see into a person's heart. To put it simply, Yen Lingyun and Qin Shuhan were enemies, but also close friends. Nye Tian looked up at the two of them, smiled, and said, "These two are really interesting. Just a moment ago they were so close to killing each other, but now they appreciate each other." Yen Lingyun, frankly speaking, our strength is about the same. However, I, Qin Shuhan, will definitely determine who is superior and who is inferior with you today. At this moment, Qin Shuhan spoke once again. His eyes were filled with a cold glint. "Qin Shuhan, do you still want to fight?" Yen Lingyun was taken aback, but of course he wouldn't back down. "If you want to fight, I'll keep you company." "I want to fight, but not between you and me." Qin Shuhan laughed, a strange look in his eyes as he shouted, "Tian and I." As the sound of his voice faded, a silhouette appeared. Like a beam of sword light, it was so fast that it couldn't even be blinked, directly arriving beside Qin Shuhan. It was a black-garbed swordsman, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. His facial features were handsome and angular. He looked like he was in his 20s, but in reality, he was more than 1,000 years old. 1,000 years was a very young age for a God Realm expert. However, his strength was shocking. He was actually a peak paramount god, and he was surrounded by a mysterious sword will. Clearly, he was a terrifying swordsman. "Master," the black-garbed swordsman said, bowing slightly to Qin Shuhan. Qin Shuhan nodded her head. After which, she shifted her gaze onto Yen Lingyun, her eyes filled with provocation as she spoke. "Yen Lingyun, this is my disciple, Yin Tianni. Tian and I greets Sword Saint Lingyun." Immediately after, Yin Tianni faintly smiled at Yen Lingyun. Although his tone was respectful, he didn't do anything. He didn't bow, he just stood there calmly. Such an attitude was already too much for a Sword Dao senior like Yen Lingyun. "Qin Shuhan, you have indeed taken in a good disciple. His talent is astonishing and his strength is astonishing." Yen Lingyun did not care about Yin Tianni's attitude. Instead, she looked at Qin Shuhan and said with a faint smile, "You suddenly called out your disciple. What exactly are you trying to do?" The corner of Qin Shuhan's mouth pulled into a strange arc as he said, "Yen Lingyun, because of your existence, I, Qin Shuhan, am unable to become the #1 swordsman of the Frozen Ruins. Since I can't be the best swordsman, I can only let my disciple be the best swordsman. Since we are unable to determine a victor between us, then let our disciples fight in place of their masters, using the victory of our disciples to determine who is #1 and who is #2. How about it?" After speaking, Qin Shuhan looked at Yen Lingyun cold. The provocation in her eyes was even more intense. When Yen Lingyun heard Qin Shuhan's words, he couldn't help but frown. His face darkened. In the world of martial Dao, the relationship between master and disciple was the most important. In many situations, Master and disciple were even better than father and son. A disciple fighting in place of his master. This kind of situation wasn't common, but it wasn't rare either. Yan Lingyun indeed didn't think that Qin Shohan would suddenly make such a move today. Actually, what Qin Shohan said was right. It was indeed very hard to determine a victor between the two of them. Letting the disciple fight in place of the master could be considered a way to win. But sadly, Yan Lingyun only took in one disciple in his life. That was Feng Qi's big brother, Feng Xiu. Sadly, Feng Xiu wasn't here at this time. But Yan Lingyun himself also knew that even if Feng Xiu was here, he wasn't Yin Tianyi's match. Feng Xiu's talent and strength were both considered genius level. But compared to Yin Tianyi, he seemed to be quite a bit lacking. Yin Tianyi's talent in swordsmanship, even in the entire frozen remains, was definitely a rare existence. When the crowd below heard Qin Shohan's words, they started discussing. A disciple fighting in place of his master is indeed a very good idea. But Sword Sage Lingyun's disciple might not be around. That disciple of Lord Selfless Sword Demon has very strong sword intent. One look and you can tell that he is a top swordsman. Even if Sword Sage Lingyun's disciple is here, I'm afraid he will also lose. Selfless Sword Demon clearly thought about it long ago. He was just waiting for this moment. Really despicable. The crowd's discussion entered Qin Shohan's ears, but it didn't affect his emotions in the slightest. What he wanted was the title of the #1 swordsman. He wanted to hear Yan Lingyun admit defeat. As for what kind of method he used, he didn't care. Yan Lingyun, you don't dare to accept the challenge? Seeing that Yan Lingyun didn't speak for a long time, Qin Shohan laughed and said, or do you think that your disciple is not as good as my disciple? Yan Lingyun's face was extremely embarrassed. Qin Shohan was forcing him in front of everyone. He was trying to make him lose face. Yan Lingyun, if your disciple doesn't dare to accept the challenge, you can directly admit defeat. Then, Qin Shohan's provocative voice sounded again. It was extremely arrogant. Yan Lingyun's eyebrows were tightly knitted together and his face was gloomy. When Ye Tian saw this, he couldn't help but frown and he was speechless. Qin Shohan was a grandmaster-level swordsman after all. How could he play such childish tricks? #1 swordsman, #1 swordsman. At the side, Qiju swordsman laughed and said, for this title, Qin Shohan really racked his brains. It's just a title. Is it that important? Nie Tian's eyes focused, and he said with a puzzled expression. Just a title? Qiju swordsman was stunned at first. Then, he let out a strange cry and looked at Nie Tian in disbelief. He said, boy, you make it sound so easy. That title is the #1 swordsman. Let me ask you, which swordsman doesn't want to be the world's #1 swordsman? For people like Yan Lingyun and Qin Shohan, who are only one step away from being #1, the importance they attach to this title is something that ordinary people can't understand. It's not an exaggeration to say that if Qin Shohan can obtain the title of #1 swordsman, he'd probably be willing to die the next day. Nie Tian looked at Qiju swordsman's exaggerated expression and was even more speechless. It seemed that the difference in views between him and these strong cultivators was really big. Compared to the empty fame, Nie Tian valued benefits more. If there were no practical benefits, even if the title of #1 swordsman was given to him, he wouldn't want it. It would only add to his troubles. Yan Lingyun, as far as I know, you only have one disciple. I think he's from the Feng family. At this time, Qin Shohan's provocative voice sounded again. He said arrogantly, I've seen your disciple. His talent in swordsmanship is not considered trash. Compared to my disciple, it's like the difference between heaven and earth. To put it bluntly, my disciple is an abyss dragon, and your disciple is a small loach in a stinking ditch. So, you should just admit defeat. Hearing Qin Shohan's words, Yan Lingyun frowned and his expression darkened. Is that so? At this moment, an ice-cold voice rang out. Immediately, a figure appeared beside Yen Lingyun. Nie Tian's gaze focused and he suddenly looked over. His expression suddenly darkened. Chapter 2601. Chapter 2601. Chapter 2601. 7% chance of victory, Feng Qi. Feng Qi's sudden appearance caused Yen Lingyun to be taken aback. This matter had nothing to do with Feng Qi. What was he doing here? At this time, Qin Shohan looked at Feng Qi, her gaze slightly stunned. She then laughed coldly. Brat, you are from the Feng clan, right? Yes. Feng Qi nodded his head heavily. He stared at Qin Shohan and said, The little loach in the gutter you were talking about is my elder brother. Qin Shohan said that Yen Lingyun's disciples were little loaches in the gutter, and Yen Lingyun only had one disciple, which was Feng Qi's elder brother, Feng Xiu. Hearing someone insult his elder brother, how could Feng Qi not be angry? Seeing Feng Qi's indignant expression, Qin Shohan chuckled and said, Little brat from the Feng family, are you trying to stand up for your elder brother? Can't I? Feng Qi's lips curled into a smile. He said coldly, I, Feng Qi, am representing my elder brother to challenge your disciple. Do you dare to accept? Hearing Feng Qi's words, Qin Shohan was stunned, unable to react for a long time. The rest of the people were also stunned. This battle was originally a battle between Yen Lingyun and Qin Shohan. Then, a disciple came to fight, and it became a battle between the disciples of both sides. But now, Feng Qi wanted to fight on behalf of his elder brother. Actually, it was normal for disciples to fight on behalf of their master, and younger brothers to fight on behalf of their elder brother. But when these two things happened at the same time, it seemed a little inappropriate. Feng Qi was not Yen Lingyun's disciple. If he fought with Qin Shohan's disciple, even if victory was decided, how convincing would it be? Nie Tian looked at Feng Qi, also stunned. He did not expect Feng Qi to suddenly make such a move. What? You don't dare to accept the challenge? Seeing Qin Shohan not speak, Feng Qi could not help but laugh coldly. Humph! Qin Shohan reacted and laughed evilly. After which, he turned to Yen Lingyun and said, Yen Lingyun, this brat is representing his elder brother to challenge my disciple. Do you agree? Yen Lingyun frowned. Her expression was very ugly, and she could not help but look at Feng Qi. Feng Qi nodded heavily, his expression clearly saying, Uncle Yen, please believe me. I agree. Yen Lingyun thought for a long time and finally nodded. Although Feng Qi was not his disciple, he was very confident in the former's strength. Frankly speaking, Feng Qi's martial arts talent was indeed above his older brother Feng Xiu's. Moreover, in terms of battle prowess, Feng Qi was stronger than Feng Xiu. Letting Feng Qi accept this battle was far more likely than letting Feng Xiu accept it. All right. Seeing Yen Lingyun nod, Qin Shohan smiled sinisterly. He looked at Yin Tianyi beside him and said, Tianyi, you play with him. Remember, just don't kill him. I understand. Yin Tianyi's lips twitched, revealing a sinister smile. Qin Shohan said not to kill Feng Qi. That meant that he could cripple him. Brat, you are very courageous. Yin Tianyi took a step forward and looked coldly at Feng Qi. He said darkly, I hope your strength is worthy of your courage. Brat, you are very arrogant. Feng Qi also smiled and said loudly, I hope your strength is worthy of your arrogance. The same words coming from Feng Qi's mouth were extremely provocative. Yin Tianyi's gaze froze, and a hint of killing intent flashed in his eyes. Then, the two figures moved at the same time. They came to an empty space and stood opposite each other. The two stood in the air, their auras vigorous. One was like a spear that could split the clouds, the other was like a giant sword. And at this time, in the air, who knew how many strong cultivators were hiding? These strong cultivators included the sect leaders and elders of the major sects, as well as some other strong figures. They looked at Yin Tianyi and Feng Qi with trembling eyes, each having their own opinions. These two brats are both at the peak of the paramount god level. The Feng family kid is a spear user. His spear principle has reached the pinnacle of the realm of spear and martial arts as one. Unfortunately, Yin Tianyi is a legendary sword user. I'm afraid the Feng family kid is in danger. An old man in green said in his heart. Since Yin Tianyi was accepted as a disciple by the selfless sword demon, there is no doubt that he is strong. If the Feng family kid did not hide his strength, he would have lost. Another hidden expert said quietly. Spear users and sword users are very rare. I'm afraid the sword will have the upper hand in this battle of spears and swords. Another expert shook his head helplessly with a burning gaze. Although these hidden experts did not communicate with each other, they all thought that Yin Tianyi was stronger than Feng Qi. On the other side, Nie Tian frowned, his eyes filled with worry. To be honest, he also felt that Feng Qi was slightly weaker than Yin Tianyi. Lord Swordmaster, what do you think of this battle? Nie Tian could not help but ask Sevenju Swordmaster in a low voice. Nonsense, look with your eyes. Sevenju Swordmaster glanced at Nie Tian and said impatiently. Nie Tian was speechless. It seemed that even Sevenju Swordmaster did not know who would win and who would lose in this battle. Nie Tian, don't worry. That Feng Qi kid is stronger than you think. I feel that he has a 70% chance of winning this battle. At that moment, little Fat Cat's voice suddenly rang out, chuckling as it spoke. Nie Tian was stunned and asked, Fat, did you see something in Feng Qi? Previously, Nie Tian did not want to join the world's #1 army. He only joined after Fat Cat asked him to. At that time, Fat Cat probably saw something. However, there were too many things to do later on, so Nie Tian did not ask Fat Cat. Don't worry, you'll know when you continue watching. Fat Cat smiled mysteriously and said no more. Nie Tian frowned, not knowing what Fat Cat was trying to do. At this time, the two figures high up in the sky moved. Boom! Boom! Feng Qi and Yin Tianyi attacked almost at the same time. The spear shadow and the sword shadow roared out like a mad dragon and bloomed with dazzling sword radiance in the air. Boom! In the next moment, the spear and the sword collided and the void shook. Endless power turned into raging waves and raged in the space. Feng Qi and Yin Tianyi's figures retreated at the same time and then stabilized at the same time. It seemed that the first exchange of blows, the two were equally matched. However, Nie Tian could see that Feng Qi was at a slight disadvantage. Kid, your strength is not bad. However, it's a pity that you chose the wrong opponent. Yin Tianyi sneered and slashed with the wind fire 9 inverse in his hand. Boom! Instantly, the sword intent drew a line of fire in the air, and then suddenly bloomed, turning into a sea of fire. It burned into a flaming sword shadow and blasted towards Feng Qi. This sword, Yin Tianyi obviously used his true strength. The power was much stronger than the previous sword. Yin Tianyi was a dual attribute martial artist of wind and fire. In his sword intent, not only did it contain the blazing of fire, it also contained the agility of wind. That flaming sword shadow was like a bolt of lightning. In an instant it pressed towards Feng Qi. Chapter 2602. Chapter 2602. New Yorkies of Doomsday, be careful. Everyone looked up into the sky and couldn't help but exclaim. Feng Qi stood on the spot like a wooden stake. He actually didn't move at all. Wasn't he committing suicide? Nie Tian looked at Feng Qi and clearly saw that the latter's expression was very calm, as though he had a card up his sleeve. It seemed as though Feng Qi didn't care about Yin Tianyi's attack at all. Have you given up resisting? Yin Tianyi stared at Feng Qi and the corner of his mouth twitched, revealing an extremely cold smile. In his view, Feng Qi's current action was giving up resisting and seeking death. He felt that even if Feng Qi resisted, he wouldn't be able to block his sword. Boom! Immediately, the flaming sword shadow attacked, and was already only 100 meters away from Feng Qi. This kind of distance was already very dangerous. In just an instant the sword's shadow would completely drown Feng Qi. However, at this moment, Feng Qi's eyes suddenly trembled, and then a strange scene happened. Swoosh! In Feng Qi's eyes, a strange force was suddenly released, surging in the void, forming a strange vortex. The vortex wasn't big, with a radius of about 10 meters or so, but it released a very terrifying aura, as though it could devour everything. Boom! And in the next moment, the terrifying sword shadow in the sky fell directly into the strange vortex, like a clay ox entering the sea, disappearing without a trace. The sudden scene caused everyone to gasp in unison. Their expressions were shocked to the extreme, and they didn't dare believe the scene before their eyes. This was too strange. Such a terrifying sword shadow was actually devoured by a small vortex. If they didn't see it with their own eyes, who would believe this strange scene? Huh! Qin Shohan saw this scene, his eyes sank and his face was full of shock. He also didn't expect that Feng Qi actually had such a strange method. Is this what makes Feng Qi so terrifying? On the other side, Yan Lingyun was also stunned for a moment, and exclaimed in his heart. In fact, he already knew that there was a terrible power in Feng Qi, but he didn't know what it was. Now that he saw it with his own eyes, he knew that Feng Qi had an innate other pupil. Innate other pupil. At the same time, Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and he almost cried out. He saw very clearly what had happened just now. The vortex was the power released from Feng Qi's eyes. Without a doubt, Feng Qi was a other pupil martial artist. Haha, I was right. This kid's eye is the fifth extra pupil, the Doomsday Eye. At that moment, the little fat cat's excited voice rang out in Nie Tian's mind. The Doomsday Eye? Nie Tian went blank for a moment before his eyebrows furrowed, and a surprised expression appeared on his face. It turned out that Feng Qi's other pupil was one of the 10 great Khanate other pupils, and it was the 5th other pupil. That's right. Fat Cat still couldn't hide his excitement and laughed loudly. I wasn't too sure before, but now I'm very sure that Feng Qi kid's eye is the Eye of Doomsday. Nie Tian was stunned for a few seconds, and finally reacted, and couldn't help but laugh. Just now, he was still worried about Feng Qi, but now that he knew that the latter had the Eye of Doomsday, he was much more at ease. No wonder Fat Cat would say that Feng Qi had a 70% chance of winning against Yin Tianni. The kid from the Feng family is actually a other pupil martial artist. In the void, countless hidden experts were also stunned and shocked. Feng Qi dared to take the initiative to challenge Yin Tianni, so he had such a terrifying trump card. Kid, you really have some tricks up your sleeve. At this time, Yin Tianni, who was high up in the sky, quickly calmed down after he reacted, and looked at Feng Qi solemnly, without any fear. That's not all I have. Feng Qi smiled coldly, and then his figure moved. 2 terrifying eye vortexes were released from his cold eyes, and they appeared on his left and right like 2 shields, protecting him. Very good, I want to see how strong your other pupil is. Yin Tianni wasn't afraid at all, and with a low roar, he slashed down with the Wind and Fire 9 inverse strike. Instantly, a boundless sword will fell, and it actually formed countless fire beasts in the sky, like a rain of fire, pressing down on Feng Qi. Seeing this, Feng Qi's lips curled into a cold smile, and then his figure moved, and he actually dashed towards the fire beasts in the sky. Wherever his figure passed, the 2 eye vortexes on his left and right exerted force, directly swallowing the fire beasts around him. When the crowd saw this, they were extremely shocked. No one expected that a battle between geniuses would turn the tables in an instant. Feng Qi's speed was very fast, and in an instant, he was only about 1,000 meters away from Yin Tianni. The blaze of wind and cloud, dragon roar to the 9 heavens. In the next instant, Feng Qi let out a low roar. The ardent wind and cloud saber in his hand abruptly pierced out. Instantly, spear intent gushed out as a tyrannical giant dragon appeared in the air, roaring as it charged towards Yin Tian. Yin Tianni was in midair, and his eyes were full of battle intent. The wind and fire 9 inverse strikes slashed down, and the sword intent was extremely sharp. The sword light was blinding, as if it was going to tear the sky apart. Boom! Whoosh! Then, the sword's shadow fell, and the tyrannical giant dragon in the air was actually split into 2 halves. Yin Tianyi smiled coldly, and then his figure moved, retreating backwards, increasing the distance between him and Feng Qi. Feng Qi steadied himself, and then he looked at Yin Tianyi with a gloomy gaze, surprised at the latter's strength. One had to admit that Yin Tianyi was indeed terrifying. Under these circumstances, he was able to break Feng Qi's attack with one sword. But Feng Qi had the protection of the Eye of Doomsday at this time, and he was almost in an invincible position. The vortex condensed by the Eye of Doomsday was very terrifying, as if it could devour everything. Then, Yin Tianyi attacked again, one sword after another slashed over, as if he was crazy, and did not stop at all. Feng Qi's figure stood in the air, and he did not dodge, relying on the Doomsday vortex to devour all attacks. Nie Tian watched from afar, but his brows furrowed. Faintly, he felt that Yin Tianyi seemed to be planning something not good. And at this moment, Fat Cat's voice suddenly sounded, and it cried out and said, "This guy is testing the endurance of the Eye of Doomsday." "What do you mean?" Nie Tian was stunned for a moment and exclaimed. But before Fat Cat had time to speak again, Yin Tianyi's voice came from high up in the sky. "Everything, it's time to end." Yin Tianyi stood high up in the sky, the sword intent on his whole body suddenly skyrocketed. Waves of violent thunder-like sword intent surged in the void, making his entire person look like a mad demon of the sword. How is this possible? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, a look of horror on his face. He suddenly felt that Yin Tianyi's sword intent aura was actually several times stronger. That kind of violence that was on the verge of bursting out was completely incomparable to just now. Nie Tian faintly felt that Yin Tianyi seemed to have released some kind of power in his body. This kid has innate martial meridians. At this moment, Fat Cat's voice sounded again and exclaimed, "It's sword meridians." Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, and his expression changed in a swoosh. He sensed the sword intent surging in the void, and his entire person froze all at once. Boom. And in the next instant, Nie Tian's body suddenly shook, and a sword momentum rushed up to the sky. Chapter 2603. Khanate Sword Meridian. Shiju swordsman stared at Nie Tian with his eyes wide open in shock. He suddenly realized that Nie Tian's sword Dao realm had broken through. This was too strange. He had never seen a swordsman who could break through to the next realm without moving. Chiju swordsman was right. Nie Tian's sword Dao realm had indeed broken through from advanced fusion of sword and martial arts to pinnacle fusion of sword and martial arts. It's the sword meridian in that kid's body. Fat Cat exclaimed in realization. The reason why Nie Tian broke through at this time was because Yin Tianyi had activated the sword meridian in his body. It was also at this moment that Fat Cat suddenly sensed that Yin Tianyi was a cultivator with Khanate martial meridian, and it was a sword meridian. Khanate martial meridian was a martial meridian nurtured by heaven and earth. It was an item of heaven and earth that was obtained by a cultivator by chance and integrated with the cultivator's martial body to become the power of the cultivator's bloodline. The power of the bloodline was already very abnormal. Khanate martial meridian was the power of the bloodline nurtured by heaven and earth. One could imagine how strong it was. In fact, Nie Tian was no stranger to Khanate martial meridian. Jun Aoqing's ghost meridian was a type of Khanate martial meridian. Yin Tianyi, like Jun Aoqing, was also a person with Khanate martial meridian. What was more frightening was that Yin Tian's Khanate martial meridian was an extremely rare sword meridian. The so-called sword meridian was the sword meridian, a martial meridian that was very suitable for condensing sword intent. To put it simply, connate martial meridian was the power of the bloodline nurtured by heaven and earth. Connate sword meridian was the sword intent nurtured by heaven and earth. The reason why Nye Tian had a sudden breakthrough in sword Dao realm was because the sword intent in his body was stimulated by Yin Tianni's sword intent. Nye Tian had stopped at advanced fusion of sword and martial arts for a short time, but the growth of his sword intent was too terrifying. So, not long ago, he felt that his sword intent was showing signs of breaking through. The impact of Yin Tianni's bloodline sword will gave him an opportunity to break through. It allowed his sword Dao realm to break through from advanced sword martial unity to pinnacle sword martial unity. Die! And at this moment, in the sky, Yin Tianni's fierce roar resounded. A crazy sword slashed down violently. An enormous and boundless flame sword shadow, like the Milky Way that had burst the dam, fell down with a loud bang. When the sword shadow fell, the whole world seemed to turn into a sea of fire purgatory. It was extremely hot. Yin Tianni was determined to defeat Feng Qi with this strike. His innate sword veins was called 9Ni sword veins, and its reverse killing power was extremely terrifying. Just now, he had already tested the endurance of Feng Qi's Eye of Doomsday, and it was absolutely unable to devour his sword. How terrifying! The surrounding crowd felt the sword intent aura that was blazing like fire, and they cried out one after another. Their eyes were horrified to the extreme as they looked at Yin Tianni in disbelief. Feng Qi hid his trump card, but Yin Tianni similarly hid his trump card. These two people were indeed very terrifying and shocking. It was a pity that Feng Qi met Yin Tianni, and he was destined to only be able to hold back his hatred. Feng Qi stood in the void, feeling the enormous aura pressing down on him, and his pair of cold eyes couldn't help but tremble. He immediately felt that the power of this sword was too strong, and his current Eye of Doomsday couldn't resist it. But now, he had no way out. He could only fight with his life on the line. In an instant, he made up his mind, and his eyes started to continuously release the enormous pupil power. The pupil power vortex in front of him expanded rapidly. Boom! But at this moment, the enormous flame sword shadow fell from the sky and directly rushed into the Doomsday vortex, making an ear-piercing sound. Feng Qi's figure shook slightly, and his eyes actually overflowed with blood. The power of Yin Tianni's sword was too strong, and his Eye of Doomsday was still too weak to devour such an enormous sword intent. Whoosh! The next moment, the Doomsday vortex in the sky finally couldn't bear it anymore, and with a loud bang, it directly collapsed. Bam! Then, the flame sword shadow suddenly bloomed, and endless flames fell, bombarding Feng Qi's body. With a dull sound, Feng Qi's figure directly flew backward. His figure was burning with flames, and he retreated for several thousand meters before he managed to stabilize himself. This shocking scene caused everyone's expression to turn sluggish. Countless eyes flashed, and they were incomparably shocked. And at this moment, the experts hidden in the void were completely shocked. They didn't even know what kind of power Yin Tianni had released, and why the sword intent could explode so much in an instant. Feng Qi. Yan Yun was stunned for a moment before he reacted and shouted, "Uncle Yan, I'm fine." Feng Qi's figure stabilized, and he suddenly raised his head. Although his clothes were torn, and his body was covered in flame wounds, he was still alive. "Kid, your other eye is only so." Yin Tianni smiled coldly, and his eyes were cold and disdainful. "You!" Feng Qi looked at Yin Tianni, and his heart was extremely stifled, and he couldn't speak for a moment. Even if he was unwilling to admit defeat, there was no other way. The truth was in front of him, and he had indeed lost. How could he have imagined that Yin Tianni was actually a Xiantian sword meridian martial artist? "Kid, you have to pay the price if you lose." At this moment, Yin Tianni suddenly laughed coldly, and the corner of his mouth curled up into a cold arc. Then, his figure moved, and he directly rushed towards Feng Qi. The sudden scene caused everyone to be stunned, and their eyes trembled. Yin Tianyi had already won, and he still wanted to attack. What was he thinking? Kid, you are a capable fellow. I won't kill you, but I will cripple you. Yin Tianyi was in mid-air, and he directly slapped out with his palm, and a sinister laugh came from his throat. He attacked, not to kill Feng Qi, but to cripple Feng Qi. You dare! In an instant, Yan Lingyun reacted, and he roared. His figure moved, and he wanted to attack. Yan Lingyun, you and I don't need to interfere in the battle between the younger generation. But at the same time, Qin Shohan's figure also moved. She had long guessed that Yan Lingyun would attack, and she directly stopped the latter. Boom! And at this time, Yin Tianyi's palm rolled down, like a curtain that covered the sky, and it was about to land on Feng Qi's body. Feng Qi stood on the spot, his eyes trembling, and he felt the true aura of despair. At this very moment, he no longer had any strength to retaliate. If this palm of Yin Tianyi landed, Feng Qi could only be a cripple for the rest of his life. Stop! At this critical moment, a furious voice suddenly sounded. Following that, a sword shadow appeared in the air, and it arrived from the sky. Boom! In the next instant, the palm shadow landed, but it was perfectly blocked by the sword shadow. Huh! Yin Tianyi's figure froze, and he suddenly froze. Following that, he raised his head, and where his gaze landed, it was a silver-haired swordsman. Nia Tian. Feng Qi was startled. Turning his head to look, a familiar figure appeared. It was precisely Nia Tian. Nia Tian took a step out and came to Feng Qi's side, protecting him behind him. A pair of eyes stared at Yin Tianyi, cold and austere. He said coldly, Feng Qi has already lost, but you still want to cripple him. Aren't your attacks too vicious? Chapter 2604. Chapter 2604. New YORK2 Freaks. Yin Tianyi stared cold at Nia Tian. His eyes were filled with malice and murderous intent. He defeated Feng Qi, but he didn't kill him. Instead, he wanted to cripple him. Feng Qi was a member of the Feng clan after all, and the power of the Feng clan was something that even Qin Shohan feared. When Yan Lingyun saw that Feng Qi was saved by Nia Tian, her eyes narrowed and her tensed face relaxed. But Qin Shohan's face darkened, especially when he sensed Nia Tian's strength. His eyes darkened and a hint of murderous intent surged. He didn't expect that there would be such a talented swordsman here. Looking at Nia Tian's age, he was younger than Yin Tianyi, but his swordsmanship realm had already reached the pinnacle of sword and martial arts as one. What surprised Qin Shohan even more was that the power of Nia Tian's sword intent was extremely terrifying, far surpassing swordsmen of the same realm. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to block Yin Tianyi's palm so easily. He even felt that Nia Tian's sword intent wasn't any weaker than Yin Tianyi's. Of course, this was under the condition that Yin Tianyi hadn't opened the 9Ni sword vein. Nia Tianling looked at Yin Tianyi coldly. He didn't want to be entangled with the latter. He turned around and prepared to leave with Feng Qi at this moment. Feng Qi was seriously injured and urgently needed medical attention. You want to leave just like that? Dream on. But Yin Tianyi clearly didn't plan to let Nia Tian and the others leave. With a wild roar, he slashed down towards Nia Tian with his sword. The terrifying sword intent filled the air into a sea of fire, rolling like raging waves as it came over ferociously. Nia Tian frowned and a hint of coldness flashed in his eyes. In the next moment, a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. He suddenly moved and slashed towards the sky with astral heavenly slash. The sword shadow was like a mad dragon, soaring into the sky. Boom! Then, the two sword wills clashed against each other. A thunderous rumble echoed in the sky, and an endless amount of power turned into waves of qi that crashed into the sky. Nia Tian was hit by the shockwave and retreated several hundred meters. Yin Tianyi, on the other hand, was rooted like an old tree, not moving at all. Nia Tian, are you all right? Feng Qi couldn't help but cry out in alarm. I'm fine. You can leave. Nie Tian steadied himself. His face was gloomy and cold. At this moment, Chiju a swordsman and Huang Fu Hong arrived. Nie Tian, can you do it? Don't show off. Sword Monarch 7 Absolutes was very nervous and his voice was trembling. He did not expect that Nie Tian would suddenly make a move. He was ordered by the Ghost King to protect Nie Tian. However, Yin Tianni was Qin Shohan's disciple. He was definitely not someone to be trifled with. More importantly, Qin Shohan was watching from the side. Obviously, she would not allow others to interfere. Especially Sword Monarch 7 Absolute. He was a senior swordsman. It was obviously not appropriate for him to interfere in a fight between juniors. Don't worry, Nie Tian replied and said, you guys can leave with Feng Qi. After saying that, his gaze was murderous as it locked onto Yin Tianni's body. Yin Tianni's ruthlessness had already angered Nie Tian. Brat, you want to fight me? Yin Tianni could feel the coldness from Nie Tian and couldn't help but sneer. With a face full of disdain, he said, do you think you have the strength to fight me just because you withstood one of my attacks? What a joke. Nie Tian also sneered and said in a low voice, between the two of us there is indeed a joke. But it's not me, it's you. Presumptuous. Yin Tianni could not tolerate being looked down upon by Nie Tian. With a roar of rage, he moved and slashed out with the wind and fire 9 defiances in his hands. Suddenly, a terrifying sword essence gushed out and a terrifying flaming sword shadow appeared. Like a giant burning beast, it blasted towards Nie Tian. Watch out! Sword Monarch 7 Absolutes and the others who retreated to the side saw this scene and broke out in cold sweat for Nie Tian. Sword Monarch 7 Absolutes knew that Nie Tian was very strong. But the enemy that the latter was facing was Yin Tianni. Facing Yin Tianni's violent attack, Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. Then, sword essence gushed out from his body. At the same time, the power of the divine demon was released. Suddenly, the aura of the sword essence around him skyrocketed several times. The current him was already at the pinnacle of the realm of sword and martial arts as one. Sword essence combined with the power of the divine demon, the power that could erupt was comparable to that of a martial artist at the pinnacle of the divine state. Boom! In the next instant, the divine demon sword shadow whizzed out like a mad dragon, exploding in the void. Boom! Immediately, the two sword shadows collided in the air. Suddenly, the power of the sword essence bloomed crazily. The sword light rushed to the sky, dazzling. Nie Tian and Yin Tianni's figures retreated at the same time, both retreating 1,000 meters away. These two guys are simply abnormal. The surrounding crowd saw this scene, their expressions trembled, and they were abnormally shocked. No one thought that Nie Tian could actually fight with Yin Tianni to this extent. Nie Tian stabilized his figure. His face was a little pale, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Nie Tian, your previous injury has not healed yet. You can't fight with this guy recklessly. Fat Cat felt that Nie Tian's breathing was unstable and hurriedly reminded him. 3 days ago, Nie Tian suffered a blow from the Sky Demon sect leader. Until now, his injury had not recovered. His sword essence was suppressed, and he was not in his peak state. Even though his sword Dao realm improved greatly, but compared to Yin Tianni, it seemed to be a little weaker. Huh! Seeing that Nie Tian was injured, Yin Tianni's face did not show a smile, but shock and anger. Nie Tian only had the strength of a late-stage paramount god. His sword Dao realm was also only at the peak of sword and martial arts as one, and he had just broken through. Whether it was martial arts strength or sword Dao realm, Nie Tian was weaker than Yin Tianni. Therefore, Yin Tianni felt that his sword just now could not kill Nie Tian, and that was a failure. Even at this moment, he still regarded Nie Tian as a jumping clown, and did not see the latter as a real opponent at all. Stinking brat, the next sword will take your life. Yin Tianni's eyes turned cold, and the sword essence all over his body suddenly surged. A huge sword aura surged in the void, extremely shocking. Huh! Seeing this, Yenlingyun's eyes suddenly trembled, and he was very worried. He was not too sure, with Nie Tian's strength, whether he could contend with Yin Tianni or not. This guy's sword essence has become stronger again. Nie Tian felt the fluctuations of the sword essence in the void, and his eyes trembled slightly. Stinking brat, die! Immediately, Yin Tianni roared, and the wind and fire 9 nemesis slashed down. The sword essence in the void instantly became violent, and a sea of fire appeared between heaven and earth. The space within tens of thousands of meters directly turned into a huge furnace, and it seemed like the air was burning. This sword, Yin Tianni did not use the 9 nemesis sword vein, but he activated the strongest sword essence, and its power was extremely terrifying. Earth sword, moon devouring. Nie Tian stood in the air, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Once again, the godly demon power was released, and 4 terrifying forces rushed out and merged with the sword essence around him, merging into the godly demon sword essence. Boom! The sword essence surged, and the sword shadow was like a dragon, whistling against the wind and shaking the void. Chapter 2605. A strong threat rumble. Chi. High up in the sky, the sound of explosions could be heard continuously. Endless wild power wreaked havoc in the space, as though the entire heaven and earth was about to collapse. The crowd stared dumbfoundedly at the scene in the void, their eyes trembling non-stop, extremely shocked. No one had thought that this battle would actually turn out like this. After a moment, the wild waves in the void dissipated, and the figures of Nie Tian and Yin Tianni appeared in the vision of the crowd. Nie Tian stood in the air, his face even paler and extremely embarrassed. The blood at the corner of his mouth was even more obvious, and it was obvious that he had suffered serious injuries. As for Yin Tianni, his eyes were spitting fire, like a ferocious beast that was about to go berserk. The corner of his mouth was actually also stained with blood. Yin Tianni was actually injured too. How is this possible? Qin Shohan, who was watching the battle from afar, was shocked and almost cried out. He had never thought that Yin Tianni would actually be injured by Nie Tian. Yin Tianni's strength, among the younger generation of swordsmen, was definitely a top-notch existence. Qin Shohan even thought that among the martial artists under the age of 50,000, there was almost no one who could defeat Yin Tianni. Hence, he had the confidence to confirm his title as the #1 swordsman through Yin Tianni. But how could he have thought that a swordsman whose strength and age were below Yin Tianni could actually injure Yin Tianni? This was simply too inconceivable. This silver-haired swordsman's talent is simply terrifying, even above Tianni. Qin Shohan's gaze was as cold as iron, and he said coldly in his heart, "This person must not be left alive." He felt a huge threat from Nie Tian. This made him want to kill Nie Tian. Qin Shohan, you better behave yourself. Nie Tian is not someone you can touch. Yenlingyun stared at Qin Shohan all the time, and felt the murderous intent in the latter's eyes, and said coldly, "Is that so?" Qin Shohan sneered and said directly, "If I want to kill him, who can stop me?" In the sneer, there was undisguised murderous intent. Yenlingyun's brows furrowed, his face as dark as water. Qin Shohan's personality was unreasonable and ruthless, and her way of doing things was different from normal people. Perhaps he would really personally kill Nie Tian. However, right after Qin Shohan's voice rang out, a ghost-like aura quietly appeared. Yenlingyun and Qin Shohan both sensed that something was wrong at the same time. They abruptly turned around and looked at the empty space. In their line of sight there was a figure wearing a ghost mask, standing there solemnly. Ghost King. When Yenlingyun saw this figure, he exclaimed in his heart. His eyes were filled with joy. Why is this old monster here? Qin Shohan frowned when she saw the Ghost King. She couldn't hide the shock on her face. Qin Shohan, This is Plentiful City's ghost city. You better behave yourself. The Ghost King's feet moved, his figure drifted and landed. His voice was cold, but there was a strong threat in it. Nyetian steadied himself. When he saw the Ghost King, his expression softened. His condition wasn't good. If he continued to fight, he would probably be at a disadvantage. In the next moment, he moved and retreated. Want to run? When Yin Tianyi saw the situation, he roared angrily. A cold glint flashed in his eyes. Following that, his figure moved, wanting to attack Nyetian. But at this moment, he felt an invisible force descending from the void and directly controlled him, making him unable to move at all. Let go of me. Yin Tianyi felt an invisible hand clamping down on his neck, making it hard for him to breathe. He struggled to turn around, looked at the Ghost King, and shouted with a face full of horror. The Ghost King's arm was stretched out in the air, his 5 fingers clenched, and his eyes were as cold as killing intent. At this time, as long as he exerted a little force, he could directly kill Yin Tianyi. Lord Ghost King, stay your hand. The sudden scene shocked Qin Shohan. She hurriedly took a step forward and said anxiously, Qin Shohan, I don't care how impressive you are outside, but since you came to Plentiful City's ghost city, you have to behave yourself. The Ghost King's eyes turned and stared directly at Qin Shohan. He said in a cold tone, Plentiful City's ghost city is my city. I don't care who comes here. If you are a dragon, you have to coil up for me. If you are a tiger, you have to lie down for me. Qin Shohan's face stiffened, very embarrassed, and said, Lord Ghost King, what happened just now was my fault, please stay your hand. The Ghost King's eyes flickered. He raised his arm and directly threw Yin Tianyi to Qin Shohan. Tianyi, are you okay? Qin Shohan caught Yin Tianyi and asked with a nervous face. Teacher, I'm fine. Yin Tianyi's small face was pale, still in shock. Qin Shohan looked at the Ghost King with a puzzled face. He really couldn't understand why the Ghost King would suddenly appear and was obviously protecting Nyetian. Could it be that Nyetian was a member of the Ghoul 13 Coffins? Have you all watched enough? At this time, the Ghost King growled and said wildly, If you have seen enough, quickly get lost. The angry voice resounded in the space like thunder. The surrounding crowd retreated one after another and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Even an expert like Qin Shohan didn't dare to be presumptuous in front of the Ghost King. Of course these people could only cover their heads and flee. Qin Shohan. At this time, the Ghost King's pair of cold eyes suddenly looked at Qin Shohan and said solemnly, That silver-haired swordsman is called Nyetian. He is the person I want to protect. If something happens to him in Fengdu Ghost City, I will not let you go. Threat, a naked threat. Qin Shohan's eyes trembled, and he looked at Nyetian again with a face full of unwillingness. He didn't expect that for Nyetian, the Ghost King would dare to threaten him like this. Directly threatening the selfless sword demon, perhaps only an expert like the Ghost King could do it. Lord Ghost King, since you have spoken, then I will give you face. Qin Shohan thought for a moment and said solemnly, But after leaving Fengdu Ghost City, Lord Ghost King won't care so much. I only care about Fengdu Ghost City. The Ghost King responded cold, and then his figure moved and directly left. Qin Shohan looked at the direction where the Ghost King left, and after a long time, he turned his eyes to Nyetian, smiled cold and said, Boy, I will let you live for a few more days. Nyetian frowned and did not say much, but said to Chijua Swordmaster and the others, Let's go. Then, Nyetian and the others directly left. Yen Lingyun's figure moved and followed. Teacher, you let them go just like that? Yin Tianyi was much calmer, and he looked at Nyetian and the others with a face full of resentment, his eyes very unwilling. At this time, he realized that he had underestimated Nyetian. He felt a great threat from Nyetian. If he had known that Nyetian was so powerful, he would have directly used 9Ni sword vein. Qin Shohan also had a face full of resentment, but what could he do? Both the Ghost King and Yen Lingyun were present. Even if he personally attacked, it was impossible to kill Nie Tian. Tianni, after entering the Ghost King's tomb, you must look after this boy. Qin Shohan's face was gloomy, and he said coldly. Yes, Yin Tianni nodded heavily and said, I will definitely find a chance to kill this boy. Don't kill him. Qin Shohan suddenly waved his hand, and said with a strange expression. Yin Tianni was stunned, and he looked at Qin Shohan with a puzzled face, not knowing what the latter was going to do. Follow this boy closely, and see what he is going to do, Qin Shohan said in a low voice, the corner of his mouth raised in a strange arc. He felt that the Ghost King must have an ulterior motive for protecting Nie Tian. Perhaps the Ghost King and Nie Tian had made some kind of deal. And this deal was very important to the Ghost King. Chapter 2606. What a beast! Inside a room in the Ghost Tower of Plentiful City. After Nie Tian channeled the power of the Terra Vein Source into Feng Qi, he let out a long sigh of relief and said, You're fine now. You'll recover after a few days of rest. Nie Tian, thank you so much. Feng Qi nodded and thanked him solemnly. His battle with Yin Tianni was indeed very dangerous. If not for Nie Tian's timely intervention, he would have been a cripple by now. You and I are friends, no need to be so polite. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, I really didn't expect you to have the fifth other pupil. Feng Qi smiled awkwardly and said, So what if I have the fifth other pupil? I still lost to Yin Tianni. Yin Tianni has the innate sword meridians. He is indeed a powerful character. Nie Tian smiled bitterly and said, If I were to fight him, the result would be unpredictable. Kid, aren't you underestimating yourself a little too much by saying that? Chijua Swordsman chuckled and said, You hadn't recovered from your injuries and were almost at the same level as Yin Tianni. If you were at your peak, that kid would most likely not be your match. At this moment, Chijua Swordsman's impression of Nie Tian had changed greatly. He could feel that there was an even greater power in Nie Tian's body that had yet to be released. Perhaps. Nie Tian took a deep breath and smiled faintly. In fact, he wasn't underestimating himself, but he really wasn't confident that he could defeat Yin Tianni. No one knew how powerful the innate sword meridians were. Who knew if Yin Tianni had an even more powerful trump card on him? Feng Qi, you rest first. Then, Nie Tian and Chijua Swordsman didn't linger and left. After walking out of Feng Qi's room, Sword Sovereign 7 Ju chuckled and looked at Nie Tian with a malicious look in his eyes. Sword King, why are you looking at me like that? Nie Tian asked with a frown, his scalp tingling from Sword King Chijua's gaze. Tell me the truth, kiddo. How many women do you have? Sword Sovereign 7 Almighty asked with a mysterious smile on his face. This. Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. He was a little embarrassed and said, Is there a need to tell you this? It's necessary, very necessary. Chijua Sword Master chuckled and said fervently, Just tell me, how many are there? 4. Nie Tian had no choice but to agree when he saw that Sword Monarch 7 Almighty was determined to get the answer. So far Nie Tian had 4 women in his heart. Mo Rushi, Rui Qianyu, Sher, and Jun Aoqing. However, there was no confirmation between him and Jun Aoqing. Nothing had even happened between a man and a woman. 4. Sword Sovereign 7 Sword Master let out a strange cry as he looked at Nie Tian with a horrified expression and said indignantly, You're a beast. Nie Tian was speechless. He didn't know what was wrong with Sword Saint Chijua and why he was so angry. I don't have a single woman. I'm still a virgin. You King have 4. How inhumane. Sword Saint Chijua said with an aggrieved expression. Nie Tian was speechless once again, and his face darkened. He didn't expect Sword Saint Chijua to be an old virgin who was hundreds of thousands of years old. However, looking at Sword Saint Chijua's behavior, it would be difficult for him to find a woman he liked. In fact, many martial artists would lose interest in the affairs of men and women when their strength reached a certain level, unless they met someone who could make them fall in love at first sight. Sword Saint Chijue, why are you asking me this? Then, Nye Tian's eyes flickered and he asked with a puzzled look. I. Sword Saint Chijue looked at Nye Tian and stammered. His eyes flickered and he couldn't speak for a long time. What's going on? Nye Tian was utterly confused and worried to death. Nye Tian, I think. Sword Saint Chijue seemed to have summoned his courage, but he swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. What do you think? Nye Tian was so anxious that beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. I think I'm in love, Sword Master Chijue quickly said. His face, which was like a withered tree bark, actually blushed a little. You! Nye Tian looked at Sword Saint Chijue and was stunned. His face was full of black lines. He didn't expect Sword Saint Chijue to be in love. Given Sword Saint Chijue's age and strength, it was impossible for him to be impulsive. Who was it that made the dead flame in Sword Saint Chijue's heart come back to life? Could it be? The next moment, Nye Tian suddenly thought of something. He was stunned and exclaimed, Tower Master! Shoo! Sword Saint Chijue was startled by Nye Tian's words. He quickly covered Nye Tian's mouth and said seriously, I haven't confessed yet. Nye Tian was speechless. He stood there for more than 10 seconds, unable to react. He really wanted to persuade Sword Saint Chijue to forget about confessing. It was a waste of time and expression. Not to mention Sword Saint Chijue's appearance. He and Huangfu Zhangxing were on opposite sides. Sword Saint Chijue was one of the 13 sky coffins, and Huangfu Zhangxing's brother was killed by the patriarch of thousands of babies in one of the 13 sky coffins. Huangfu Zhangxing regarded the 13 sky coffins as his mortal enemy and was determined to kill them all. Under such circumstances, how much charm did Sword Saint Chijue have to make Huangfu Zhangxing kneel before his coffin? To put it bluntly, Nye Tian really didn't find anything about Sword Saint Chijue that could fascinate women. Nye Tian, you already have 4 women. Based on your experience, do you think I have any hope? Sword Saint Chijue was very excited at this moment. He looked at Nye Tian and asked. Nye Tian was stunned and didn't say anything for a long time. Sword Saint Chijue's question was too profound, and Nye Tian really didn't know how to answer. Nye Tian, say something, Sword Saint Chijue urged when he saw Nye Tian didn't say anything. Sword Saint Chijue, I won't answer. Go and confess your feelings to the pavilion master. I wish you good luck. Nye Tian swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said with a serious expression. How can I do that? I'm not ready yet. Sword Saint Chijue was stunned for a moment and said very seriously. Nye Tian was speechless and said in his heart, Is there any difference in your situation if you're ready or not? It'll be good if you can come back alive after the confession. He could only say these words in his heart. He really didn't dare to provoke Sword Saint Chijue in front of him. In fact, Nye Tian felt that with Sword Saint Chijue's strength and status, what kind of woman couldn't he find? Why did he have to find Huangfu Zhangxing? Could Sword Saint Chijue control such a domineering woman? It had to be said that Sword Saint Chijue was a man with dreams and a model of working hard to find true love. Ah! At this moment, a scream suddenly sounded.